afternoon, everyone. We're in the Community Development Standing Committee of Tuesday, April 4th, and we're meeting on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Looking for a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Chappell. All those in favor, opposed, motion carries. There are minutes to the Community Development Standing Committee of March 7th to be approved. Moved by Councillor Pryor, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor, opposed, motion carries. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, our first item on the agenda, well not first, but the first real one, big one, is a delegation from the Mountain Bike Economic Assessment Study, and we have Martin Littlejohn and company, and maybe pass it over to Martin if you want to introduce everyone, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks everyone for having us here today. My name is Martin Littlejohn. I'm with the Mountain Bike Tourism Association. And with me today is Donna Green, our chair of the Mountain Bike Tourism Association, and Jeff Cook with SORCA also has some slides at the end of our presentation. So, may as well get started here. We have about 25 slides or so to go through here quickly, just to give you a bit of a sense of what some of the outcomes from the study were. So this was the mountain biking economic impact study. This, and for many of you probably recall, there was, let me move on here to my next slide. How do we do that? Oh, there we go. So this was a study that was a follow-up to one that was done in 2006, and basically to determine the economic value of mountain biking to the community. Very similarly, we're looking at the total value, or what we will come up with is a total value for communities throughout the Sea to Sky corridor, including the North Shore. And in this time around, we've also included Pemberton. In 2006, it was just Squamish, North Shore, and Whistler. That composite of the entire corridor, that will be coming a little bit later this year. So Squamish is actually the first segment of the study that has been completed, and so that's what we're going to show you today. The study used the STEAM model. This is one that is used by the Canadian Sport Tourism Alliance. They're based in Ottawa. And Tony Fisher is the lead consultant on this study. He works with the Canadian Sport Tourism Alliance. And anyway, for Squamish, there was a total of 445 completes done in the study. And these are in-person surveys, so they're conducted on the trails with mountain bikers that our surveyors would meet during the course of their shift. So, and the period of the study was in which the data was collected was between June the 11th and August 29th of last summer. So here's some of the findings. Based on the origin, this is the origin of those that were surveyed. And this compares 2006 with 2016, so we can actually start to see some of the changes that are occurring over that 10-year period. So a bit of a shift here in terms of a reliance on Greater Vancouver to a more diversified visitor group. So we're seeing increases here, particularly from the U.S., quite significant, but also other BC, other Canada, as well as international. So those are some of the major noticeable differences over the last 10 years. Donna, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. And if anybody has any questions as I go through here with any of the numbers or some of the things that are being presented, please don't hesitate to interrupt. From those that were from the U.S. and international, these are what we found in terms of the top U.S. states, those that are sort of more our closer regional markets, Washington, Oregon, as well as Colorado being a very significant mountain biking kind of community or state of in its own right. And California as well. Utah and Wisconsin. I'm not sure about them, but Utah and California also make a great deal of sense. Very high participation rates in mountain biking from those states as well. On the international side, these definitely sort of match with some of the key overseas markets that we that we recognize. Not necessarily in this particular order, but it's a very close match in terms of seeing New Zealand and Australia in there, as well as France and Switzerland and the UK. The only other ones that we might have missed in this, because it's a fairly small sample size from the international group, is, you know, potentially Germany could be there as well. They're one that's also being recognized as a key market for mountain biking here in BC. But otherwise, fairly close to what we would expect. Riding party size. This compares. This is just focused on the 2016 data that compares local with visitors in terms of the size of their riding group. So fairly similar, but of course, as you might expect, the locals do tend to ride more on their own or in smaller groups, simply because it's the convenience of it being right out the back door, and with varied schedules, sometimes you just go when you have the opportunity. Whereas visitors, obviously, they're already organized as a group on with their travel. So and we're seeing those groups around 2.8 is the average. So you know that probably varies from, you know, a fairly small couple or groups of 2 people up to you know, substantially more, but the average being at 2.8. Riding party ages, and this is for both locals and visitors. That sort of sweet spot tends to be that 30 to 39-year-old age bracket. But the one thing that this shows, and that we see in other data that we collect, is that there's a very good broad range of ages that do participate and are attracted to mountain biking as both for recreation and as a tourism experience. So that's always good to see. Then we also broke it down by gender, and this again, perhaps what you may expect. We're certainly seeing a lot of more women riders within on our local trails. I mean, I notice that I ride mostly on the North Shore, but we're seeing it there, and I know here in Squamish has a very strong female contingent in the riding community. You know, I think we're even seeing that on the visitor side. We don't show the 06 data here, but it seems to me we're seeing some growth for women as part of the riding community, even among the visitor group. So it used to be more like 80-20 or even 90-10 to begin with, but we're seeing that expansion, which is great to see. That is certainly an area of which to grow the market. Certainly comes from more women riders, perhaps more younger riders as well, more families getting involved. Skill level and future trails. So in this case, you know, again, comparing both local and visitor riders. Fairly similar kind of stats. We do see a slightly more, I guess, riders that consider themselves more expert among those who are visitors. Perhaps that might make sense. Many want to, you know, feel comfortable about traveling to a place that is known for its challenging single-track trails like Squamish and parts of BC. It's going to attract a more perhaps skilled rider, but it's still not too or it's fairly similar to what you've been seeing here among the local riders too. But yeah, so Squamish obviously has a very established riding community with some riders who are very competent in their riding skills. And as far as the future trails that these riders would like to see developed or see more of in the future, definitely falls within that blue and black categories, the intermediate to advanced. But still some recognition for the need for, you know, those entry-level trails as well as those that challenge themselves more than the rest of us care to. Any questions so far?
Lots of
No.
hands. Yep.
Oh, question?
Go ahead.
How are the numbers, are people not answering all the questions on all the surveys? We're losing the difference between the locals. I mean, it's probably just a survey discrepancy.
You mean in terms of the sample numbers?
People were answering like for their actual parties, so you're going to see the sample sizes
Okay.
vary.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not too far off, but they're not quite.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
they-
Yeah.
yeah, there's,
just curious.
yeah, no, very good.
So as far as information sources, you know, it's always that word of mouth and past experience is always a really important one, but one that has really obviously just shot up in the last couple of years is Trail Forks has definitely become a main or major source of information for people looking for both, you know, planning where they're going to ride as well as navigating the trails while they're actually out riding. So that has become a huge game changer, as you can see from this graph.
Does everyone know what Trails Forks is? So Trail Forks is a listing of all trails. It's a subsidiary of Pink Bike, so it's a great local product that's been used around the world, and it basically gives you a map and listing and kind of perspective of this trail's difficulty and elevation, gain or loss. A lot of great information. So people are now going there to look at maps. It's also a real great tool because if people are linked in on their Strava accounts, it allows us to track which trails are being used the most through little heat maps and give us great user data as well. So it's great. You know, it's a great local thing. It's nice to see Pink Bike getting a real big boost. And this is not only here, I think it's worldwide.
It is worldwide, yeah, and it's, you know, I sometimes feel like I should be a Trail Forks rep or something. I'm always kind of promoting its benefits. They've done a fantastic job, and I mean, it even just shows up so clearly on this study too. So, in any case, yeah, it's a great game changer for us in terms of helping people find the trails. So yeah, so there's that information. Let's see, is there any points else to mention here? Yeah, I guess again that little sidebar there with respect to the breakdown on the origins of those using Trail Forks. It is, you know, for those from outside of, or from other parts of BC, Canada, and the US, you can see, and international, very high usage rates there. So the word is definitely out. People know that this is an important tool to have when you're on a mountain biking vacation. And yeah, so we also recognize that, of course, and try to do whatever we can to endorse the use of that, because it does also help with the management side of the trails based on some of the metrics that Trail Forks is able to give to the community. So.
Just to clarify, when you say local on this slide, are you talking Sea to Sky?
Yes.
Including North Shore or?
No.
No, just Whistler, I think, is
Yeah.
actually incorporated into that number.
And other Sea to Sky?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Overnight stays and accommodation type. So for this one here, we can see that the day trippers represent 39%. That's the dark green segment there. Whereas, as it points out here, in 2006, that was actually 79%. So you're seeing less day trippers, more, but that's probably because they're becoming outproportioned by those who are now coming and actually staying overnight. And those overnighting in Squamish represent 46%. About 12% are staying in Whistler, and the rest, maybe Vancouver or other parts of the Sea to Sky. And the type of accommodation that they're using, those that are staying in Squamish, a significant portion are camping. That's certainly readily available here. But also there is 23% that are staying overnight in hotel, motel type accommodation. And
Justin, how many people in Whistler are staying in Airbnb?
yes, well, I think for Whistler, it's very common. People do, use with the huge supply of more condominium-style accommodation, Airbnb and VRBO, and all those types of booking engines are used. So that to me makes sense, I think.
I think too, we're seeing that with more trails and more notoriety of the trails and better loops, it gives people a reason to stick around and ride for 2 or 3 days and get a lot of different variety in the riding. And that's probably different than how it was 10 years ago. So that's, the more we build the trail network, we give more people a reason to stick around and stay for a destination type resort in a way.
I'm usually up at Crankworks every summer, and we are part of the we have a booth set up in the village and sort of get a chance to meet a lot of people that are coming through. And I know for a fact that it seems, since 2006, where the focus was really just mainly on Whistler, now when people come and they're maybe at Whistler, but they're doing day trips down to Squamish and Pemberton. They're really kind of greater awareness for what is available throughout the entire corridor. So people aren't just focused on Whistler anymore when they come to the Sea to Sky, so which is great to see. I'm going to turn it over to Donna now for the last few slides.
All right. Okay. So yeah, just to follow up on Martin's point there, and Jeff was saying too, people are staying longer, 5.8 nights in Squamish, up from an average of 3, just over 3 in 2006. We also had, again, the sample size gets pretty small, but we had some people who were spending a bit of time in Squamish, and then elsewhere in the province, you can see that their vacations are almost 20 days long. So you're actually getting people that are making a real effort to be in the corridor, staying in the province longer. But again, that's just a fairly small group of people.
I think, and it mirrors what people from Squamish do when they go to ride in other destinations like Bend, Oregon, or Moab. You'll go down, you'll stay for a week, camp, or bring your trailer, do your thing, maybe hit a few different spots along the way. So we're just seeing a lot of that kind of transformation of people coming up here when the weather's better, from Oregon, from Washington, from other places, now doing the same thing here. So it's nice to recognize that we're becoming known as much of a mountain bike destination as places like Moab, Utah, which is pretty renowned throughout the U.S.
So we asked people, just for some assessments of the actual experience while they were here. So you can see what we refer to in market research as the top 2 box. So people saying that it was excellent or above average. Both visitors and locals are giving very high assessments from everything from trail maintenance, ease of finding their way around, the trail conditions. The only one I potentially draw your attention to is parking. You've got locals significantly less satisfied with parking than visitors, and you guys probably know much more about that, but if there's some ammunition for some future discussion, that might be it, just amongst
I think they're the people that own the houses.
Yeah, I know, yeah. Martin and I were debating that.
At the end of Perth.
Is it people parking out front of their house, or is it when they go up to,
Or Bridge international visitors know there's parking problems at every single mountain.
Yeah, it's true,
station,
yeah.
so that they're not as-
Yeah, exactly.
This one's probably not as bad as they've seen.
No, yeah, exactly. If yes isn't North Shore, I'd get a different result. Okay, and then we just asked them, you know, overall, how would you characterize your ride? And you can see there, you've got, you know, almost 100% of people saying it's good or great. So the next question we asked them was, you may be familiar with Net Promoter Scores, which is basically it's one question, but you're basically asking around advocacy, willingness to recommend. It's a 10-point scale, and the question basically is, how likely would you be to recommend Squamish as a mountain biking destination to your friends and family? So people who give you a score of 9 or 10 are the ones who are going to be out there saying, yeah, I just went to Squamish, I had an amazing time. You know, they're your promoters. Some people in the middle who are like, yeah, it was pretty good, you know, I'll give you a 7 or an 8. And then people who actually like, don't go there. You know, and that's a score from 0 to 6. So you basically just take the promoters minus the detractors, and you end up with what we call Net Promoter. So you can see for Squamish, you've got some incredible results there. There's basically nobody in that middle camp of saying, yeah, it's pretty good, but almost everybody, you know, 9 out of 10 people saying, yeah, go to Squamish to mountain bike. So you're ending up with some really high scores there. So figuring out for Tourism Squamish how you leverage that, getting people to share their experiences, invite their friends. So yeah, that's a pretty good news story there. And we asked just a single question to locals only is how important were the trails in your decision to move or to live in Squamish? There again, you've got, you know, 8 and 10 people saying, you know, it's important, very important, with the bulk of those being very important. So your residents appreciate the trails too.
The ones that are on the trail.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
Kind of
exactly.
preached
Yeah,
to the
you're
choir
right. It's a
there,
little
right?
bit, little bit biased.
For that particular question.
Yeah. So then we move on just to some of the economic impact type calculations. So this is where Tony Fisher comes in with his magic in terms of using the survey data, as well as using Trailforks data and the Half Nelson Trail Counter, just to try and figure out the volume of people on the trails. So you can see the Squamish riders in particular are very heavy users of the trails, 43, basically 44 rides a year. So their locals are accounting for about 100,000 rides on the trails, about half of the volume, but visitors being the other half. So, and we just did some, you know, comparisons from 10 years ago, and you can see, you know, the volume. Same-day riders have doubled overnight, up 600% in 10 years. So, also a good news story. And we asked, obviously, for economic impact, just questions around spending. So this is asked of everyone who's a non-resident, basically. Any visitor, so you've got day visitors in here as well as overnights. That's why the accommodation spend is going to be low. Restaurants being the, you know, the bulk of the spend. Bike shops, of course. Transportation, people likely filling up with gas while they're here. So the average expenditure of around $150 per person per day. And then,
And just to clarify, that
Sure.
doesn't include cost of car rental or the bus ticket or
no,
anything?
exactly, yeah. So then when we kind of apportion that across everyone, so your same day spend is about $62, so, you know, people coming up from Vancouver for the day. It's about a third of the overall volume or expenditure, so we're up to about $9.9 million of new money coming into the community. A third of that coming from same-day visitors, but you know, $2 million coming from the U.S. So, and about the equivalent coming from international visitors. So they're obviously spending more, staying longer.
Yeah, we saw like the biggest areas of growth in terms of the visitors were the U.S. was high, so those guys are spending $300, but also other Canada and international, although its percentages are very small, they increased about 25%. So you're kind of looking forward as to where you want to target. Obviously, you want to try and hit the ones who are spending most per visit, and you know, and that kind of gives you an idea of where to focus, whether it's a marketing campaign or how to deal with that. But I think those, when you get into the little details of the stats and look at it that way, it gives you a pretty good roadmap for where you can crank things up pretty significantly with a little bit of targeted effort.
Yeah.
And it goes up exponentially as soon as you have an overnight stay.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so planning things that help encourage that. So, you know, even creating, here's your 3-day plan in Squamish, ride these 3 loops in 3 days. Like campaigns like that can easily encourage people to stay, and getting the hotels to buy into that, to, you know, to promote that as well on their websites. You know, anything you can do. It's not rocket science. It just is just trying to do some smart tactical things can change this from, you know, 9 million to 15 million in a year if you do the right thing. So, I mean, the opportunities are immense, what's ahead. It's really quite encouraging, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, thank you. That was going to be my question,
Mhm.
is what did we learn from this? And
Mhm.
how are we all going to benefit? And then Jeff starts answering that question. But when you say you know, like you or we, who is it that's going to do
Well,
this?
that's the thing that we got to figure out. So there's a few more discussion, and later on, I think we'll get to that, and how we accomplish that.
Yeah, just cognizant of time, so.
Right. Yeah, we just got a couple more slides.
Councilor Chappelle has a question.
Oh, sure.
I'm wondering how we leverage this across sectors. We all know that the economic impact affects hotels, bike shops, and the industry related.
Mhm.
How can we do better to leverage this across small business and wellness days, cross-promoting culture, land use issues, and resolutions with, I think about the infrastructure issues all the time, trying to help with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no answer to that. I mean, I think that is part of the next step,
That's
is
the outcome
to
of this, is.
dedicate
figure
resources
this
to
out.
solving that puzzle. It's not terribly difficult, it just takes effort, and we just, as volunteers, don't.
I think, as you can tell, there's a lot of momentum that's moving in this, you know, just to an interest in what's available here in Squamish. So, you know, it's how you want to try and, you know, exploit that in some manageable way. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
excellent information to have. Thank you so much. The survey is fantastic.
Mhm.
I
I
love
think we have a
it.
few more slides.
Yeah, just get you through this, so just show you all know how economic impact modeling works, but basically take that $9.9 million expenditure from that previous slide.
We'll just
yeah.
round up to 10.
Okay, yeah, exactly, that's basically what happens. The operational expenditure, which is basically Circa's budget. That feeds in, get your multipliers, and then it's basically what's coming out of the other end.
And just back to that
Sure.
slide, I mean,
Okay.
the expenditures are not just Circa, there's all sorts of other, Tourism Squamish spends money, and the
Right.
district spends money, so it's, I'm not sure that's a fair number, but.
Yeah, I think that's what Tony, the economic
The
impact
bike
consultant,
shops, the
used.
hotels
Yeah.
are spending money on this, so it's not really.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this is more like the capital expenditures for trail development, maintenance, that kind of thing is what he's put into it, but you're right. I mean, it goes beyond that.
Okay.
Alright, so yeah, just some numbers for you there to sort of focus on. Yeah, so we've got the GDP, the employment, estimating basically 71 jobs in Squamish are directly related to mountain biking. What you're pulling in terms of tax revenue for the municipality, and then as well as for the province and for Canada.
How do these columns compare to each other? I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I know, we were trying to sort that out with him as we were coming up, and it's cumulative is from the way he was explaining it. So like the British Columbia municipal tax, that's the 174,000 for Squamish goes into that. So it's basically the province is adding another 20,000, seeing another 20,000 off that. We can get you some more details because it was
I'm really
confusing.
interested in the employment one, trying to
Mhm.
understand that column, that row.
Because I believe it's the direct impact and then the induced impact and then but we can definitely provide you with some more details there. Probably the column to focus on is the Squamish
I was
column.
scratching my head on that one.
Yeah.
But Tony Fisher is the guy who can answer that question.
Yes. Very valid questions. We're
Yeah.
scratching our heads too. We've got all the backgrounder piece of the glossary and how to interpret things, so happy to share it with.
I think theoretically, you're taking $10 million of spending in a community. Obviously, they're spending it in restaurants, shops, hotels, which have employees that eat up some of that salary. So what this is estimating through the model is saying that if that money is injected in, it's supporting 70 jobs,
Right.
roughly, in Squamish.
And 89.4 in the west, so cumulatively it's supporting 250 jobs.
I
think it's,
think it's 104 is the
Yeah, it's
total.
That would be
Yeah.
the total.
Oh,
because
and
it's
then
a
it's
package
71
price.
70 in
Squamish.
Squamish, another 15 outside of Squamish, but in British Columbia, and then another 15
Yeah.
throughout Canada.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So the guts, the most of the benefit of all
Is
this
here.
stuff is
Is here.
happening right here.
yeah.
And of course, the same study is happening in North Van and
Yeah.
in Pemberton and in Whistler too, so you kind of, that'll expand from there.
I know, slightly confusing, but focus on the Squamish
That
results.
helped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The light bulb went off.
Yeah. Okay, just, a couple of summation slides for us. So, 23,000 riders, taking basically 100,000 rides in your community, bringing in $10 million, responsible for $3.4 million of wages, 71 jobs, and then some of the provincial impacts to GDP, taxes, and then just that number of people actually staying in Squamish. Our last slide is just the comparison between the two. So you can see some pretty impressive jumps over 10 years.
So let's, like the numbers here are pretty significant. Like when you say, $10 million in spending, we have to keep in mind that's just related to the tourism aspect of mountain biking in Squamish, okay? And we were really excited, and rightfully so, that we had 1.5 million related to the film industry and what resources are put into that. So let's think about this in terms of here's $10 million just from tourism that's getting injected to the community every year, and what does that warrant in terms of support? So can we just
Sure.
go to the next slide? So you think about the other, from the trail network standpoint, here's the other things that are into the mix. So the Squamish 50 running race had an economic impact of almost $1 million last year. The Test of Metal last year had 763,000. The BC bike race had about $250,000 expenditure directly in Squamish, but obviously some more throughout all of BC because it's obviously a stage race. So these are facts that we know. There's obviously other events happening, different running races that don't have, and different bike races and bike events that don't have economic impact studies, but this just layers on top of 10 million. So now what we know here is another 2 million roughly. So kind of go from there. And think about this, like in 2006, these were the bike-related companies in Squamish, right? So, and then we kind of look to today. So here's page 1, okay? So we've got bike shops, design, trail building, coaching clinics, tour operators, maintenance firms, film and photography that are related to mountain bike and outdoor adventure. Here's another page, different bike companies that are in town and other related businesses. So, in total, I think we counted them up, there's about 48 businesses related that are kind of bike-centric, or at least heavily influenced by mountain biking in town. Can you flip to the next one?
Yeah.
And about 148 full-time equivalent jobs. And this is outside of the tourism part of it. This is talking about people who have moved their businesses here because of the trail network, or whose businesses exist here because there's trails, and they're locating here and not in Surrey because mountain biking in Surrey is not nearly as good as it is here, right? So that's kind of the way to think about this. So we think about the other piece of this puzzle is, you know, because I'm one of them, people have moved here with, you know, as knowing that 82% of people say it's either important or very important, just part of their decision to move to Squamish. And it allows us to attract a caliber of people and a type of person that we couldn't if we didn't have that network. It adds value to land and to housing and to people who are developing land because it makes it easier for them to sell houses.
I just want to go through the slides a little.
And then just a couple more. So here's how I look at our trail network. It is continually laying golden eggs for us, and they get bigger and bigger every year if we take care of it. If we start plucking the goose to make a down pillow or not feeding it, then we get in trouble. So how do we feed the goose? And a lot of this stuff is pretty similar to what we talked about when we did the branding study in terms of how to market Squamish and how to do that. So some of the elements are pretty much the same. But mountain bike trails have to be given primary consideration, particularly when it comes to development, land uses, and other land use decisions. We have to think as important as, you know, electricity lines and sewers and pipes, you know, how are these trails connecting everything in the community, and how is it linking to this asset that we've got out there? We need to invest in infrastructure that improves the visitor experience, because if we stay on top, like so many other communities are chasing Squamish, Whistler keeps investing in their trails because they see their ridership eroding to Squamish. Other communities are trying to make a living out of creating mountain bike tourism. We need to stay on top of this to keep the audience here and keep that building. And the way to do that is to keep improving the asset that we have. And it gets to things like bathrooms, parking, signage. You know, you don't want people getting lost out on the trail network. So those are all important pieces. We need to have better long-term trail and land use planning. And so I'm a huge proponent of the community forest, and I'm glad Jeff Fisher's here to see all this. I mean, I think our way forward in the future is to be super cooperative in terms of long-term planning with the forestry industry to make sure that we can develop trails that we know are going to be around for a while and manage our forests, you know, in a way that allows this industry to grow and the forestry industry to do well as well. So we're getting to the stage in Squamish where we really need to think about how we resource this and how we get all this done, because it's getting, you know, I have another job. I have to make money at it sometimes, and this eats up about 20 hours a week these days. So it's hard for our team. We've done an incredible job, and we have such a passionate group of volunteers that will give just about anything to their community. But we're at the stage now where I think it needs to take a leap to something a little more disciplined, a little more organized, and a little more structured. And I think that's where we start to look at a model, say like the North Shore Mountain Bike Club, that has a couple of paid people in place to manage it. We just, you know, and so I think the next piece of it is to figure out how we come up with a plan that lets that happen. As part of the community forest, I mean, you kind of look at creative solutions, that's going to generate a profit for the District of Squamish as their share in that project. Maybe that's the money that gets reinvested back into that asset as how do we, you know, the managers of the trail, you know, kind of working with Jeff on the management of the entire forest, but doing that cooperatively. So everything is kind of done in tandem in a much easier, a much more coordinated way than it is now, right? Or, you know, in looking at the benefactors of the trail system now, like we do get a fair bit of money from each of our members already. Like everyone pays a membership of about $70, and a large part of that goes back into the trails every year. But to get it from visitors is something that we're, as SORC, is focusing on, but we need the hotel and tourism industry to help us with that. Looking at, you know, hotels and restaurants and other people that benefit from our trail network and, you know, getting a fair share from them, and looking at the development community who are, you know, benefiting from having a more attractive neighborhood because they have trails there, and how do we get everyone to pitch in a fair share and recognize the value that this asset is creating. So
So we need to wrap up, Jeff, so.
yeah, and that's the last slide. I think what I don't know exactly what the exact next step is, but finding a way to resource at least a plan to find this, to help this happen, I think is we're at that stage now where this is starting to get important.
Councilor Chappelle?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. You pretty much covered a lot of my ranting about assets and mountain biking. I also think as far as diversification and trails and investment in trails, if we just look at it as mountain biking, people that don't mountain bike are going to rebel against that. I think branding our trails is as an amazing asset and properly resourcing them is definitely at a time that has to happen. And you know, it's not just mountain bike users. You guys build the trails. Sorka does build the trails, but the amount of ultra marathoners and bike and runners and other sports that use our trails is becoming immense as well. I know that we have quite a few races on our trails that are maintained by the mountain bike community, but utilized by the trail running community, and maybe some cross branding between that as well. But somebody told me yesterday that on a rainy day in April, that over 30 people were lined up at the trailhead for Sudasuga to go down and having to do it in a line-up, organized way. And in my time in Squamish with mountain biking, I've never had that experience where, you know, you come upon large groups of people lining up to go down the trails. And I think it's going to be more and more common if we don't resource it with bathrooms, infrastructure, and parking. It's going to become more of an annoyance.
Councilor Cryer?
Me?
Yep.
Thanks, Jeff. How does North Van pay for theirs? There are people that work on that. And how about advertising on the trailheads?
Yeah, they're both good ideas. So North, do you know much about the North Van funding
A
model?
little bit, yeah.
So are we gonna, because this was a comprehensive study that did North Shore, Whistler, are we gonna hear about the Whistler,
Yeah.
North Van, Pemberton pieces at some point?
Yes,
Yes.
they'll be part of an overall
Yeah.
report,
Okay.
and so
Yeah.
certain portions of each of those will be part of that.
Well, if you're asking us for money, it'd be nice to get that clear how the other communities find that money.
Yeah,
Mhm.
well,
Yeah.
the North Shore, actually, they have what's called their trail adoption program there, which basically engages with the local business community to support the trails, you know, and it's partially used as a bit of a team building exercise for a lot of businesses. They get out there and volunteer some of their staff's time to work on the trails. You know, those companies that are into that, of course, but it's been very successful. So they generate somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 a year just through that program alone. The district also does support them. They contribute, I think, close to $100,000 a year. So, you know, they have a fairly significant annual budget just to deal with trail maintenance and infrastructure.
We'll get those numbers though.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
studies,
yeah.
we'll get
Yeah.
those.
That's the most important thing.
They
Okay.
have,
But it's-
and I think the important thing is, like, we're not asking, like, so I kind of want to get away from how we've always come to you guys and asked for 75 grand in the grant and aid. I'd rather have it as a separate guaranteed funding model that, so that's why I suggest maybe the Squamish, the community forest becomes a mechanism for generating cash from a forest that is serving two industries, tourism and forestry. So that it's not, you know, if forestry does better, mountain biking does better. You know, that kind of thing or the trails do better.
We'll get
Formula
that much
funding.
out of our forest.
So, first of all, we don't have the community forest yet,
Mhm.
we're still in the process of developing it.
Yeah.
But certainly from district or Squamish's perspective, that has always been a key piece of how and why we want to develop the forest
Yeah.
with our partners, the Squamish Nation, so
Yeah.
we're still forming that. It hasn't been formed.
And I realize that. So like what I'm thinking here is this: we're talking 2 to 3 years out planning. I think that's our scope of what we're trying to get to. But things take time, so it's worth introducing it now to make it happen. The other thing that works for North Shore is that once they've had paid people, part of their responsibility is then to go find sponsorships. So they can almost self-fund their own salary. So that's part of the model too, and going, to the different companies that benefit from the trails or benefit from the biking industry and find ways to communicate. So the North Shore has about, I think 70 kilometers of trails that they maintain. We do about 173. They're getting about 100,000 from the district. We get 75. But as I said, I don't want to just be a drain on the taxpayers. We need to find another model to make it work and find a creative solution to that.
Councillor Lee, and we're gonna wrap up.
So one question and then maybe a couple of comments on the how did you get your information about the trails? There's like 40% of people that already had prior experience, so they're
Right.
repeat visitors.
Yes.
So do you have a sense of how many trips people are making back to Squamish and whether they're repeat overnight visitors or whether they're
Yeah, I would
mostly
think that's
day
probably largely day visitors. But yeah, we didn't include that slide, but we have the information broken out, basically rider volume across the Sea to Sky corridor. So people living in Squamish, how many rides they took in Whistler. So that's in the full report. So you can definitely see, people are moving around the corridor.
But are you thinking of in terms of international visitors or people who are coming back to Squamish?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if
a
any of
couple
our
times a year?
overnight visitors are actually
Yeah, we
coming
can
back.
see,
Oh,
figure that out.
Typically, there's quite a high repeat visit among mountain bike visitors. I think once they've go to an area once and if they enjoy it, they tend to come back because they want to get to become a little bit more intimate with the area, like to learn it better. So that's quite a common kind of a thing that we've seen in other stats.
And maybe just a couple of comments. I know our CAC policy is coming back to us, but it's a way for growth to pay for trails is to take some of that general amenity portion and invest it in some of our economic drivers with the trails. And also, in thinking ahead to the OCP draft, which is coming out, is really looking at how we're going to do some of that long-term planning, but also protect the look and feel and experience of our trails, because I don't think people want to come here and ride next to subdivisions. I think they want to feel like they're riding in a forest. And so how we do our growth management and plan neighborhoods and plan connections between neighborhoods, I think is going to be vitally important, because I think if we lose that sense of adventure, that our trails are towards that black, challenging, people are coming for that experience. I think if we lose that, those 48 companies that have decided to put their brand next to ours might not feel that way long term if we turn ourselves into an experience of riding through subdivisions rather than forests and natural areas. So I think there's a balance to be had in terms of how we think about trails and our growth management practices. So that'll be on my radar. Appreciate the work and bring it forward. This is great. Hopefully we can have a longer conversation about this at some point when the big report comes out.
Yeah, we'll bring it back, and I think we have to have a conversation with our, biking community, SORCA, Tourism Association, to really sort of come up with a clear strategy. I think we've always known that trails are a huge part of the community, so it's nice to have some real data behind it and some proof, so we can, with conviction, make the decisions we need to make and tell the story we need to tell. Certainly through our branding process, through the OCP, the front end of the OCP Phase 1 and 2 trails, the recreation that happens on trails are a huge motivator and driver in our community and really important. So we all knew that, and so now it helps to really validate it through a comprehensive study like this. So I want to thank you very much. This is just the beginning of the conversation, as Jeff said. We'll figure out how we bring this back, so we're making sure that it gets dovetailed into the growth management and some of the policies through the OCP, as well as a variety of other mechanisms. And it is challenging for local governments to put forward sustainable funding, because every year is a different year, a different decision, different priorities. Ted, we're not going to do any more questions. Different priorities. So it would be fun, it would be good to figure out a different mechanism so we can fund this. We can't legally encumber future councils. Certainly since I've been on council, we've, over the last number of years, increased it. There's a real commitment by the district. I think the community supports it. We just need to figure out how to make sure it's sustainable and it's growing as per the need grows. So
Great.
So, thank you very much. We're going to move on because we're now 25 minutes late. I would open it up to the
Thank you
public
for
for
your
questions
time.
and comments,
Yes,
but
thank you.
we've run out of time, so thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Maybe we'll take a 2-minute break, let VCH come set up. Here we go. We are back in our community development meeting. We are on to item 5.1, the our little workshop with the Vancouver Coastal Health. Pass it over to Sarah.
Great, thanks so much, Mayor Heinzman. My name is Sarah McJanet. I'm a community planner with the district. Today's annual reporting and priority setting workshop is a milestone that's outlined in our the district's Healthy Communities collaboration agreement with Vancouver Coastal Health that we signed in 2015. And I'm joined at the table today by Claire Graham, policy consultant and healthy built environment lead at Vancouver Coastal Health, as well as Dr. Mark Lysyshyn, which rhymes with physician. That's how I know how to say it. If you're wondering, he's the medical health officer for Sea to Sky and the North Shore. And in the audience, we have a lively and committed crew of Vancouver Coastal Health staff, both regional and local environmental health officers and public health educators, as well as some other organizations like Sea to Sky Community Health Services Society that have been involved with us in our healthy community collaborations. The aim today is to provide an update on the spectrum of healthy community collaborations that have been occurring between 2015 and 2017. Can't believe it's 2017 already. And also our second aim is to receive council input and direction today to inform joint priority setting for ongoing activities with Vancouver Coastal Health, as well as other organizations and agencies that are involved in capacity building with us. So today, next up, we're going to provide an overview of our collaborations over the last 2 years and refer to the dashboard, the Healthy Community Action Tracker that we attached to the package. Mark will provide a community health update with some previous as well as new data for your interest. I'm going to share a recap on the Plan H Growing Impact OCP deep dives on health that we undertook late in the fall. And then Claire is going to provide some provincial and regional updates by the Health Authority. And finally, we're going to turn our attention to refining existing and discussing any new emerging focus areas for ongoing collaborations. And then I'll close and summarize. Just a note, in your agenda package, items 5 and 6 are flipped. So we're going to have Claire do the provincial updates, and then we'll have discussion. So to begin, what are we doing together and why? Our local government collaborations with the Health Authority are based on a common purpose, and that is to promote health and wellness of the community through collaborative activities in priority areas to achieve mutual benefits. And this is super important as we continue to witness increasing population health issues, chronic disease, things that are related from car dependence and sedentary behaviors. And there's growing evidence that shows us that how we plan and design and build our communities have direct effects on our health and wellness, be that physical, mental, social, or ecological health. BC health authorities are supporting the healthy community movement by providing support to local governments, building capacity and relationships, and supporting and connecting local actions. And we're seeing an increasing intersection between public health policy and community planning. And this is really essential for us as we continue to strive towards livability and health goals for Squamish. I'm going to turn it over to Claire for a moment to talk about collaborations.
Yeah, so Sarah asked me to just reflect on the past year and what are some of the major takeaways. This graphic illustration came from the forum that we held in North Van in February, where I know a number of you were there. And I was thinking about how far we've come in the past year and really building on, we already had a pretty strong partnership base because in Squamish we've had the strong supportive council on a lot of this work. You've had an incredibly dedicated staff. Your staff have been really committed and understood what was required and made it happen. So Sarah has been awesome in this work. But we've also had in Squamish partnership with the other Vancouver Coastal Health Community Health Services. And that is a piece that we don't have in all our communities, and I think even strengthens that partnership. And the piece that I think that was really added this year was integrating the work with some of the community organizations, and so it's great to have some of them here. And it's also kind of a nice sort of coming together with the food security work. We've been funding Squamish Can and their capacity building for quite a few years, and to have that link back to some of the work that you're doing it's not. I think it's an essential piece for these partnerships to work. Is we have to have the three partners all together. Last year we really got to dig deep on a couple of topic areas, and I think what that was able to do is take the broad concepts of health and planning and health in municipalities. They make sense, and turn it from an abstraction to what does this look like with specific topics. And the Plan H grant that we had really allowed us to do that deeper dive, so that we're not talking abstractions but able to get to some of the policy pieces. And I think it also was able to link in a couple of topics which perhaps the district hadn't been as involved with, like the early childhood and food security, and to kind of explore what would that look like, what is the role of the district, and how can we bring those together. The third piece that was useful this year was some of the capacity building in the workshop with Plan H and others, which is just an opportunity to build those collaboration skills, build the relationships together. And all of those together really have made Squamish one of our, you're one of our stellar stories that we like to tell, where those pieces are all coming together. And what's kind of nice to notice is that it's not just us that have noticed that, but funders. So for example, with the Avenues of Change coming in, with the big partnership and grant that they're coming forward with, the Real Estate around early childhood, the Real Estate Foundation has now funded Squamish Can to support the policy work there. So both of those wouldn't have happened had there not been the link to the district. And so it's not just the work that we're doing, but it's the work that's coming as a result of that. So that was just my reflections of this past year. I think that we've really come a long way on quite a few different levels.
Thank you, Claire. So specifically, our collaboration agreement represents a commitment to work together. We have a staff-to-staff working group or steering committee that's guided by terms of reference. And as Claire noted, this agreement, it does provide a platform for us to work together. And we have a work plan that guides us and priority areas to work on together. So that's what we're going to be reviewing today. So back in 2015, the district and Coastal Health together landed on initial priority focus areas, including active transportation, early childhood development, and food systems. These are all related to healthy, built, and social environments. And these were informed at the time by strategic priorities of the district. So at that time, we were completing an active transportation plan. There were areas of emerging community concern around early childhood vulnerability, so that was influencing the focus area around ECD. And then also emerging opportunity areas, so we highlighted local food systems, because we had just adopted a Squamish food charter and there was a lot of movement and energy around that. And so those were the priority action areas for 2015 to 2017. And the keystone project for joint collaboration and support under the collaboration agreement for this period has been the official community plan update. So what we did as a team, collaborator team, is created a dashboard for the community. It's an action tracker, and it tracks all the projects and actions that we've collaborated on, and that was attached to your council package. I noted already the highest priority project being the OCP update and support around that. So that's involved Vancouver Coastal Health with us at the table, providing health data, policy support. Vancouver Coastal Health staff have been reviewing policy content assisting us with engagement with the community. And this will continue to be a really important project, and Vancouver Coastal Health will be continue to be an important agency partner in this process. They're also going to be playing a bit of an advocacy role when we take the discussion draft of the plan out to the community in terms of helping us to work with the community, identify what the health linkages are, and to make those come into focus with the community. On the ECD front, in the action tracker, notable actions included supporting the development of a children's charter as a first step in establishing groundwork for applying a child and family lens on policy and plans. And the dashboard also highlights some new opportunities that are coming about through the United Way Avenues of Change initiative. And I just want to say, you've heard a little bit about that today, but we're planning on bringing that forward as part of a distinct item for council presentation very soon. On the active living mobility front, a lot of the collaboration work has been involved, or has involved supporting the completion and implementation of the active transportation plan, and also around the safe routes to school travel planning. And also around the active living, I want to give Tim Hoskin a chance also to highlight some of the work on the recreation services side, which we've also tried to fold in and make sure is part of the collaboration steering committee work. Tim, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if there's anything that you wanted to highlight for council, they don't often get a chance to see the connections, I guess.
Is now a good time? Or?
Yeah, if
Okay.
you want to just highlight a couple.
We have had a great relationship with Vancouver Coastal Health. We have many programs that we work in conjunction with them. I think one of our premier ones that really stands out for me is the NeuroFit, which started as a grant and working with Vancouver Coastal Health. We started a program for those with neurological conditions. That grant gave us the footing to purchase some equipment and some staff training. Now it's an ongoing program that we seem to be expanding year after year to meet a need. Staff are trained and the equipment is there, and the community need is being met. We do health fairs for seniors and for children. There's the flu clinics and many other types of programs that from staff to staff basis that are ongoing. And we hope through the upcoming grant to even expand our programs with Vancouver Coastal Health. So yeah, it's a great relationship, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. On the healthy eating and food security front, our collaboration work this year has focused around integrating the Squamish Food Charter in the OCP discussion draft, and working very closely with Squamish Can and the new Food Policy Council. And also Squamish Can and the Food Policy Council leads Crystal Tenbrink and Mickey Hunter have been really instrumental and part of the leadership group with the Plan H OCP deep dives, and so they've helped us design and deliver the OCP deep dive on food. We've done less work in some of the lower priority areas around that the health authority typically is involved with local governments on, including tobacco reduction, substance use. Although they have, around the consultation tables, we have talked about and received support, I guess, in looking at our municipal smoking bylaw and our municipal alcohol policy, things like that, how we can augment and improve our regulations. So those topics have sort of filtered into our collaboration work, but haven't been a focus to date. So we wanted to provide a couple of reflections on our collaboration so far and from the staff perspective. And certainly the collaboration agreement has set a strong foundation for multi-sector work. We know it's very clear now that one agency or organization in the community can't solve all of these complex problems, and really we have to move beyond these like individual isolated interventions to work better together, to work differently, to solve issues more at the root. And the collaborations have exponentially expanded staff knowledge, skills, and capacity for sure on speaking professionally and personally in being involved with this work. It's been really positive. We've benefited from data sharing and analysis, and we continue to build our health snapshot for our population, and there's still lots of work to be done, but it really helps us pinpoint where we need to focus policy and programming as well. And it's been excellent to benefit from sort of the bigger community health network, connecting us to other coastal health staff within Squamish, but also in the region. And I can't tell you how great it is to be able to pick up the phone and just know who can provide expertise and knowledge and help out to really advance and shift the dial. So that's been excellent. In terms of opportunities ahead, I think it's been clear to us that it's a good time to really broaden our collaborations and increase our joint efforts with, for example, with the First Nations Health Authority and Squamish Nation in particular, and also to really connect in more closely with the school district. They actually have a Healthy Schools network, and so it's a great timing to really to work on that. And then also at the regional level, Claire's going to talk a little bit more about some opportunities to collaborate more within the region. So I want to turn your attention now to topic or item 3 in the agenda, which is to give you a little bit of a teaser and summary and snapshot around the OCP health deep dives that we held. These deep dives were done and supported by the grant funding from Plan H, BC Healthy Communities, and the province of BC. So we partnered with the Health Authority and other collaborators, including Sea to Sky Community Health Services Society, the school district, as well as Squamish Can, to do 3 health deep dives. These deep dives followed a 2-day learning retreat that was hosted by BC Healthy Communities at the Cheakamus Centre last June. And our leadership group designed and delivered the 3 deep dives last October. And then just this past February, we actually hosted a reflection session to look back to those deep dives and try and harvest the learnings and really hone in on what we can bring forward. So the sessions that we held were intended to augment and deepen the consultation on the OCP around those 3 priority focus areas. So food, active transportation and mobility, and early childhood development. And this diagram just shows sort of where those deep dives sit within the overall OCP process. So in phase 2 and 3, while we've been drafting the plan, we've been hosting these deep dives to really get deeper. It was fun. It was all themed around water. We had people eating underwater, people biking underwater, and kids underwater. So our goal for the deep dives was to bring key stakeholders and community members together to identify influences, needs, and gaps and priorities to really deepen our understanding of the issues, to inform policy and actions so that we can create or increase our collective impact. So more specifically, the intentions that we set were to identify where and how we can increase efforts across sectors, so not only local government, but across education, business, non-governmental organizations. And secondly, to look for what the targeted to look for the targeted policy shifts that are necessary for us to achieve our healthy community goal for the OCP. In terms of engagement and participation, we had between 12 and 15 people attend each session. There were 3 individual sessions. We had representation from more than 10 agencies and local organizations, plus interested members of the public. They were advertised broadly. We had 2 chief ads. We ran little stories in the district e-news on our website, social media, and we also sent personal invitations out via email to many everyone involved in these areas in the community. And they took a lot of effort to pull together, but did bring a lot of deep insights and created some rich discussion that really, I think, helps us with the OCP. So every OCP deep dive session topic was unique, and notwithstanding, we designed the sessions fairly consistently. They were 3-part interactive workshops. They were a little bit experimental in terms of their approach, in an effort to, try some new ways of thinking. So what we did for each individual deep dive session is we presented some contextual snapshots, for example, for the local food system, and also for ECD, and then for active transportation. And so we did something called influence mapping to expand our understanding of the topics. So to do this, we actually involved the participants to really expand and look at the types of things that are influencing, for example, food security, or the things that are influencing, that may be influencing some of the early childhood development vulnerabilities. We then asked participants to identify where they think some of the best leverage points might be to focus our efforts. And in systems thinking, you may or may not be aware, but when we think about a system, leverage points are areas where we can apply effort to produce a change or a shift. So when we're thinking about growing our impact in health, we're thinking about where are these leverage points where we can apply some effort to cause large changes to the system. So we asked people to go along with us and identify where some leverage points might be, and where individuals and organizations might feel they have, they can actually be levers to influence change. And finally, we reflected on aligning our focus for policy shifts and action areas. So we wanted to align action where there was energy and need identified for each topic area. We tried to highlight those. I'll show you some, this is kind of abstract, but I'll show you some of the examples. So for the food deep dive, what we did was we co-created this food snapshot, as I said. And the purpose was to collectively explore and bring to the surface the settings, conditions that influence the food system for better or for worse. This helps us draw connections as well as gaps. So this will totally blow your mind because you can't see it, but this was like a massive poster, and with the help of the Squamish Food Policy Council, we attempted to map out the Squamish food system. So we looked at everything from food production to storage, processing, food distribution in Squamish, retail, food access, food waste, education and consumption. And so then we put this up on the wall, and then we started to look at where food assets could be identified. And some of those food assets include food production activities, education programs that are already going on, the food charter, as well as some of the recent regulatory changes for example, for zoning to better support urban agriculture and greenhouses and things like that. And some of the big gaps for the food system that were uncovered through this deep dive include food infrastructure, as well as food access and food waste issues. And interestingly, the highest ranked priority that was identified through the deep dive was to investigate and advance on the idea of developing a Squamish food hub, or the whole idea of food hubs. There's a lot of detail in this image, and certainly we'll be sharing the full OCP deep dive summaries that we are completing right now. So they're not quite done, but we'll package those up for council so that you can get into the nitty-gritty if you like.
So Sarah, I do have a couple of questions, but I don't want to interrupt. So I'm wondering if we can find sort of a logical place to stop. Councilors have questions, we can ask them. If they're somewhere else in the presentation, we'll just park them, say that's coming up.
I've got two slides on the deep dive, and then we can take a
Okay.
pause and then have some questions and discussion before Claire goes into, before Mark presents
Great.
the snapshot. Okay, so this is also just a little teaser in terms of the OCP deep dive that we held on the topic of early childhood development. We did the same type of influence and asset mapping and looked at gaps and priorities. Essentially what we started with was to identify and ask participants to reflect more deeply on how Squamish children are doing. And the intention was to try and unpack the early childhood vulnerabilities that we're seeing through the EDI data that Council has seen before. And so Vancouver Coastal Health, Leanne Carley, who's wasn't able to join us here today, but he was really instrumental in helping us frame this deep dive. We looked at different areas of influence, firstly, and as an example, this diagram basically has sort of concentric boxes, but for children, we looked at the things that might be influencing early childhood development, both at the parent or caregiver level, or more broadly at the household or care environment within the community, and then within kind of more societal. So this was a really interesting exercise to go through, and we looked at different influences at the parent or caregiver level. Some of the influencers included parent employment. If employed, are parents employed locally, or are they spending lots of time commuting long distances and therefore spending less time with their kids, or requiring more care? Family income, the percentage of income being spent on shelter and food, available time with children, and then as you go outward at the household or care environment level, are those children experiencing food insecurity? Do those families have family supports within Squamish or not? At the community level, the types of influences that we were looking at included availability of affordable and accessible childcare, affordable housing, are there supportive spaces and facilities, ECD programs, those types of things. So this was a very interesting exercise to go through, and we also looked at different developmental strengths and challenges, as well as local assets and gaps. And I think one of the key takeaways for us from this deep dive was really the interconnectedness between not only what's going on for children and families, but the connection with other issues within the community. So affordable housing and childcare is really linked into how children and families are doing. And so when we address one, we need to sort of be mindful to address the other influencing factors as well. And for the local government, for Squamish, this is an area that we might not traditionally kind of weigh in, but in terms of creating supportive environments and amenities for children and family, that's definitely something that within our direct realm of influence that can have big impact on the well-being of children and families. So the last slide that I wanted to share was just some overall process reflections and learnings of the deep dives that we held. And I've got 4 to 5 to share. So by going through the deep dive process and looking at snapshots and trying to frame these health issues sort of at the system level, this thinking added a lot of depth to our understanding, especially helped us identify distinct needs, assets, gaps in each area. By looking at leverage points, we looked at specifically different areas of influence and agency across different sectors. And we could start to see where there might be points of connection where we might be able to influence or make change in policy that is also aligned with the work of Sea to Sky Community Services. There's value in looking at the bigger picture to find these linkages. We were really ambitious in trying to identify all the necessary policy shifts and targets for the OCP, but this process takes time, and when you start to dive into some of these topic areas, you realize things are complex, they're interconnected, but it's a great start, and so we're on a journey here. The last reflection is that when we're trying to increase our collective impact on health issues in the community, you know, some communities or organizations actually formally enter into a process around collective impact, and this is actually quite involved, and I think it requires a lot of dedicated resources and energy. This is not what we were doing in our deep dive, but it's just that we kind of lightly touched on the idea of collective impact, but I think that's something that we might explore later at another time, but not for the work that we're doing now. I'm going to pause there before we turn to Mark's presentation. I welcome questions.
So we'll go to council, see if there's any questions. If you think they are going to be addressed through the rest of the workshop and presentation, we'll just park them, but
Sure.
Councilor Swell, you're okay, or
I'm happy to wait till the end of the presentation today.
Councilor Brown?
Well, just a couple things. I didn't see much with the school district in there, and I didn't know, I don't see their acronym in there anywhere. I didn't know how we were connected to the schools, especially with the child stuff and food security.
So how is the school district involved?
Yeah, so as part of our multi-sector leadership team that applied for the grant funding to do the OCP deep dives, we had a school district representative. It's a local teacher, Miss Naomi Radowick, who works at the Learning Connections, and she was involved all the way through with us through this process, and she wasn't able to make it here today. However, and she is connected in with the Healthy Schools Network with School District 48, so she was a great representative. But it's definitely challenging for teaching staff to get involved. We actually financially supported her participation during the day at some of the events as well, so that she could bring in a TOC to cover her class time. But so we did have school district participation.
We should get more commitment from them next time. The other thing is, and I love the science. When I finally realized what those pictures were with all the bubbles, I thought, that's really great learning tools. I really like that stuff. But is there any action items you can pull out along the way? Like I know with the food security, we talked to the CAN group about the gardens of the schools. And kids and gardens and schools, that's such a great thing for the kids. And I don't know, can't you pull out an action, like try and get the schools initiated or something like that as we go through this process, or do you wait till the end?
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that's where we come back to the collaborator agreement and the priority areas, where we set joint priorities and pinpoint the types of actions that we want to undertake together. And so I think going forward, if we bring the school district into that too, that we'll be able to, in a more concerted way, work together on more joint actions.
And certainly in the report, there's whole tables of priorities and how they're scoped. And I think where Council Carter was asking is if there's some obvious ones, not necessarily waiting to finalize something, to start acting on something.
Mm-hmm.
It's an iterative process.
For sure. And really, like the dashboard that you see here, I mean, there's all kinds of things that are going on their own anyway, but this was just a way to sort of bring them together to highlight as more of a collective set of actions, the things that we're doing in all of these different healthy community areas. But certainly there's the Food Policy Council is going for it. Like they have, the edible schoolyard projects, and they're going after grant funding. So there's all this momentum, and that's great. So we're not holding back on any of that. It's just happening on its own.
And we're going to dig into some of that as we move through. We're going to hopefully move on.
Thanks. This is always a difficult forum to deal with healthcare, in a very short snapshot of what's going on in the community and how VCH is actually integrating in our community. And when I read a lot of this, the work that you've been doing together, Sarah, and the planning department and VCH is absolutely incredible. I see it very small scope though, and what I'm seeing now is we're moving towards, when we get community involvement that is very high level and you have a lot of groups that are collaborating together, it becomes very difficult to focus the priorities and have outcomes that are actually measurable with healthcare. And when I looked at our original agreement on preventable diseases, and I think about how the community, how we as a council can actually affect community healthcare. When I originally put all this forward, it was years ago, my intention was to focus on land use, on things that we can control in council, and preventable disease, and being able to measure, have benchmarks for preventable disease with a healthcare partner, and be able to look at our land use and say, look, we've got more parks, we've made things more walkable, we've had more active transportation. And I see two of these priorities really coming together and showing that work that's being done over the years, which is amazing. When I look at the third priority of food hubs and food collaboration, I know there's groups that are passionate about food, but I look at our district and our region and wonder if there's really, access to food is incredibly important, but when we start getting into gardens and things that are very small scale, it really is a small effect on the global, when I speak about
We're
global.
going to have this conversation in the workshop later on, so.
In the workshop. And I'm just wondering about outcomes with the integration with food on healthcare and how.
So number 5 in the agenda is priorities, collaboration, action ideas for 2017-2018, and then, so the whole process is
Perfect.
all right, let's move on.
Minimize this and then.
All right, well, thank you. So it's great to be here. My name's Mark Lasician, and I've been the medical health officer on the North Shore for about 3.5 years, but as of last summer, I became also the medical health officer for the Sea to Sky area. So it's great to be here meeting you. I've met some of you before, but I'm still getting really to know this area, and actually doing presentations like this helps me get to know areas. I have to review all the data and everything, so it's a great opportunity. I'll just put this here. So this is sort of the framework that I used to put together this presentation, and it's called the Life Course Perspective on Health. And what it really talks about is the importance of the early childhood years, and this is one of your priority areas, or our priority areas, in informing health across the life course. And it's just, there's so much development of key systems, key brain pathways, key tissues during that period of time, that if things go wrong during that period of time, it results in problems throughout your life. Luckily, if things go well during that period, it could also lead to more resilience and to better health. And so that's why it's so important to focus on this early childhood period. But this is also why, in talking about the health of residents in Squamish, we want to look at health across the life course to see how these different stages are evolving, and you can see the connections from them, and how problems that are starting in that early childhood period can continue into high school, and then we see them there. And likewise, that the health problems that adults are having have an impact on their children and the way they raise them. So that's sort of the perspective that I used to put together this presentation. And so the data that I used to support this presentation are the My Health, My Community survey, and I know you guys have seen some of those results, and so I'm not going to focus on them too much, but I want to show how they're connected to these data in other age groups as well. The Early Childhood Development Instrument that looks at the health of children as they arrive in school. Ideally, we would have the Middle Development Instrument that would tell us about elementary school health, but unfortunately that's never been done here in Squamish. But we are working with a school district for the first time to do that instrument this year, so I'll probably come back and see you next year, hopefully, and we'll have data from that, and I think it will be important. And then the Adolescent Health Survey that looks at the health of youth in Squamish. And each of these 3 sets of data are collected by different organizations in different ways, but they're all comparable sets of data that we can look at people in Squamish and compare to other places, and so they're very important. So we'll start with the My Health, My Community survey. This was done by Vancouver Coastal Health and Fraser Health. It tried to survey 2% of the population. So this is just a small sample of the population, but we believe it's a sufficient sample to make conclusions about overall population health. It doesn't really capture some of the key subpopulations that would be here that are in small numbers, but that may be very vulnerable in terms of their health. For instance, it didn't capture very well people from the Squamish Nation. That wasn't the intention of this survey. And so, you know, there may be people whose health is more vulnerable than what I'm describing here. In terms of overall health status, residents of Squamish report very good health, so 57% report excellent or very good health. And I've put two comparators there. The one is the other rural regions in Vancouver Coastal Health, where 55% rate their health is excellent or very good, and also the Metro Vancouver comparator. You know, Squamish, as you guys know, is somewhere in between this rural community and this sort of urban community. And so, you know, in Metro Vancouver, only 49% of people rate their health as excellent or very good. So Squamish doing quite a bit better than that. In terms of mental health, people, or at least this is adults, I should mention as well. Adults rate their mental health as even better than their physical health, and that's similar to the rest of the rural region and also Metro Vancouver. The survey looked at key healthy behaviors. We know these are the most important behaviors to prevent chronic disease. So, you know, relatively low rates of smoking amongst Squamish residents. 10% of people smoke. That's similar to our rural area, similar to Metro Vancouver as well. Squamish has pretty good intake of fruits and vegetables. You know, it could be better. It's still only a third of people that are getting their 5 fruits and vegetables, but that's better than in the Metro Vancouver area.
I brought some here today, just so you know.
There's some oranges back there, some vegetables.
Cheese and crackers.
Yeah, so in Metro Vancouver, it's only a quarter of people that are getting that. So Squamish doing quite a bit better than that. Squamish also does really well in terms of physical activity. 62% get their 150 minutes of weekly physical activity, and that's considerably better than, you know, in the urban areas where it's about 44%. But I should say that's a minimum amount of physical activity as well. So there's still 40% who aren't even making that minimum amount. So you know, still some work to be done there. And then we looked a little bit.
Can you say what the suppressed means?
Suppressed means that there wasn't enough data among Squamish residents to be able to confidently say. You know, when we get to smaller communities, it becomes harder. You know, and sometimes we get the 2%, you know, fill out the survey, but then they leave some blank, and so then we're left with, you know, we don't. And so when there's not enough, and we're not confident of the result. And so we looked at health behaviors, and then we also wanted to look at self-reported chronic diseases. You can see that Squamish residents have very low rates of high blood pressure. It's probably having to do with their good diet and physical activity. Similar rates of mood and anxiety disorders, and lower obesity rates than the other rural areas in Vancouver Coastal Health, but similar, I guess, to the urban areas. We also wanted to look at healthcare access. We know that's an important determinant of health as well. And actually here in Squamish, people report excellent healthcare access. 92% of people report having a family doctor. That's certainly much better than in downtown Metro Vancouver, where it's only about 83% report having a family doctor. So even though there's many more doctors there, there's many more people, and it's more difficult to get connected. But we know that that's not, you know, across the rural region, we know that immigrants have a greater difficulty connecting with a family doctor, and also people with lower incomes. So we also wanted to look at the built environment. This was a specific, I guess, goal of this survey, because we knew we were entering into partnership agreements with municipalities like yours, and we wanted to make sure we had data to support some of the work we're doing. And we also know that, you know, although people saying in Squamish right now are very healthy, they're, you know, engaging in relatively good health behaviors, but we know that if they're driving their car every day, that in years to come, that they're going to suffer from chronic disease. And even more importantly, we know that if they're driving their kids around in cars, as they grow up, that when they grow up, they're going to drive cars and they're going to suffer those same chronic diseases. So we did want to get at this. This is a very busy slide, so it's a little bit difficult to see, but what it says is about 79% of people in Squamish commute by car. So that's similar to our other rural areas, but it's obviously much higher than in Metro Vancouver, where it's only about 55%. So, you know, a high rate of car use But on the flip side, actually Squamish residents, 17% of them walk or bike to work, compared to 14% in Metro Vancouver, 13% in the rural area. So you have this kind of you have more people driving, but also more people using their bike and walking. And I guess that's because there's not a lot of public transit here. And so that's, I guess, what it makes your rates of active transportation quite a bit lower, because you don't have people who can take public transit, because we consider that a healthy mode of transportation as well. Because you guys have relatively high rates of car use for commuting, we also then want to know what's the length of the commute, because we know as commutes get beyond 30 minutes, that's when we really start seeing impacts on health. And luckily here in this area, your commutes are quite short, 15 minutes, relative to twice that much in Metro Vancouver. So although you're commuting frequently, they're at least short commutes.
And that's just taking into account people who are working in Squamish.
No, they could be working anywhere. It's average. So some people are working in Squamish and probably having very, very short commutes, and some people are working in Vancouver probably having longer commutes, so. We also wanted to look at walking or cycling for errands.
Yeah, I was wondering where the data came from, because we know that, or it's been shown that over 40% of our community commutes to Vancouver. So
Yeah.
it doesn't make a lot of sense as 15 minutes.
Well, I think it's just averaging out, right? So you've got some with very long ones, probably some with very short ones.
7 minutes, so the average
I also wanted to ask people about whether they're walking or cycling for errands. Sometimes you have to drive to work because of the distances, but then we hope that communities are being developed in a way that at least you can walk or cycle for errands. And although people have high rates of walking, cycling to work here in Squamish, the rates for errand is actually sort of low. Only about 10% of people report being able to do that, similar to the other rural areas, but obviously much lower than in the urban areas. I've added a few slides here about air quality because you've already identified active transportation as one of your priorities, or one of our priorities that we're working on. But I think there's other arguments as well for trying to get people out of their cars. And the one here I'm going to highlight here is air quality. We know that many of the air quality contaminants are associated with respiratory and cardiovascular health, lung cancer, premature birth, premature death of adults. So here I've got the particulate matter listings for municipalities or for regions in British Columbia, and the red arrow points at where Squamish is. So for 2005, you were right on the guideline level. So, really close to being over it. Whistler, in fact, was over it. It was a summer where there was a lot of wildfire smoke. So you're an area that's at risk for that. So that can elevate levels. Also in the winter, lots of people are using wood burning for heating and things like that, and so that can elevate particulate matter levels as well. But I guess the point I'm trying to make with this is the main contributor to this is actually vehicles and transportation, and that keeps you at a high baseline, and then you get one of these natural events that you can't really control, like forest fires or bad nights in the winter where people are burning a lot of wood, and then it gets you over the guidelines. And so in order to sort of improve air quality going forward, you really need to reduce that baseline, have less people driving. The other contaminants, whoops, that did something weird. That's
How do you explain Horseshoe Bay in that context?
let me just try to sort out what is happening with the slide right now. Horseshoe Bay.
It's really low on those there.
Yes.
Whoops.
Okay. There's different, a lot of different factors that control an airshed, right? Including the geography, where the mountains are, where the ocean is. So some places get flushed out better than others. Squamish in terms of air quality.
Where the testing monitors specifically.
Yeah, I guess although there's one in Horseshoe Bay, there's one in Squamish. So if you're looking at those two areas specifically.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking with all the ferries coming in and bringing whatever they're burning and idling and.
Yeah, so marine traffic.
Lots of traffic.
Marine traffic's a little different. Sulfur dioxide is the main concern there, and that's been going down because they've been changing the fuels a lot and things like that. But you know, Squamish has other point sources as well, industrial sources that are producing. So it's sort of a combination of a lot of different
We don't
things.
have any industrial sources at the moment, but
At the moment.
good work, that's good.
So, and then in terms of other contaminants like ozone and nitrogen dioxide, well below guideline levels for those. But the Sea to Sky Air Quality Management Plan, you know, sort of identifies vehicle-based transportation as the most significant factor affecting the airshed, and basically this is going to be more and more of a problem as the area grows. It's growing incredibly right now, so that's more people, but it's also more cars and more transportation to bring them food and to bring them other things. So, or to come to be involved in tourism. So, so I think for this area, the active transportation issue is really, you know, about active transportation, but it's also about air quality and other health issues. And then finally, community resiliency. I don't have actually the Metro Vancouver comparisons here, but residents of Squamish actually really have a strong sense of community belonging. They really feel like they belong here, and so we know that's very important for mental health and also overall health. And so that's great. So and then just looking at the rankings again, just to sort of summarize, we didn't actually have an infographic for binge drinking, but I think you guys have heard that, and that's been in the news as well. That's one of the indicators that Squamish did do worse on, very high rates of binge drinking. Whistler also similarly. These rankings aren't.
You can easily explain that.
Well, I mean, there may be explanation. The rankings aren't adjusted for age, and so the age and sort of structure of the population. So you may have a younger population that may understandably drink more, but significantly better rates of physical activity, significantly higher rates of having a family doctor, but higher rates also of using a car for commuting and for errands, but then strong sense of community belonging. So you know, so some strengths, some areas to work on. All of this data is all available for you to look at and play with in this My Health, My Community Atlas. So I wanted to make a shout out for that. So that was the health of adults or parents in the community, and so now we'll go back to young kids during that early development period. And as I mentioned, we use the early development instrument. You've probably seen some of these data before, although this is wave 6 data, so the wave that's literally just come out. And so it looks at healthy development of children in these 5 areas: physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, language and cognitive skills, and communication skills. So, and the results are released by school district because the survey is done as children enter school. So as they're in kindergarten and the teacher has known them for about 6 months, they do this survey. So this is the overall rates of vulnerability. So vulnerability on 1 or more scales, and they try to divide it up by neighborhoods. So there's 2 Squamish neighborhoods, south and north, and the dividing line is the Montcalm River. And basically what the research on this instrument shows, that if children arrive in school vulnerable on one of these scales, they will need intervention by a professional during their school years in order to succeed, you know, at school and eventually in life. And so it's a significant type of vulnerability. We really want children arriving at school ready to learn and ready to succeed sort of on their own without the help of professionals or health services or criminal justice services. But although this is done in school, it doesn't really measure what schools are doing, because this is as children arrive in school. So it really tells us about how our communities are raising children, how families and our communities are raising children. So you can see the provincial average is about 32% vulnerable on 1 or more scales. And in Squamish, in the northern, Squamish North is right at that average. Squamish South is at 38, so a little, you know, above that provincial average. And then Whistler and Pemberton quite a bit lower, Pemberton down at 21% vulnerability. So here in Squamish, about 1/3 of children, and more probably than 1/3 in the southern part of Squamish, are arriving at school vulnerable on one of these scales. And so we can look at the scales then to try to figure out where that vulnerability is coming from. So this is the physical health and well-being scale. And so this looks at things like, can the child tie their shoes? Can they walk up the stairs? Do they arrive at school dressed for the weather? Have they eaten breakfast? So these are the kinds of questions that get asked under this scale. And the provincial average is 14.8. And so again, Squamish North sort of at that provincial average, but the southern part of the Squamish South neighborhood higher than that at 19%, showing vulnerabilities there. And then again, Whistler and Pemberton doing better on that scale. This is the social competence scale. So this basically looks at can the child come to school and make friends, play with other people in the schoolyard, questions like that. And the provincial average here is 15.7%. And so Squamish North, Whistler, Pemberton, all below that average, but again, Squamish South showing sort of high levels of vulnerability there at 19%. This is the emotional maturity scale. So this looks at how do children handle the stress at school. You know, are children able to, you know, participate? Are they too shy? Are they crying? Are they, you know? So these are the kinds of questions that they ask. And the provincial average here is 16.1%, and both Squamish neighborhoods here are above that. And so this is probably the scale that's of most concern in across the whole Sea to Sky School District, but particularly in Squamish. And it's this scale and the one before it, the social competence scale, the social emotional development that sort of predicts problems with mental health, future as kids grow up. So they arrive at school already having difficulty handling the stress of school and making friends, and then, you know, by elementary school those problems progress, and then by high school we're seeing mental illness, and you know, those are the current concerns that we are actually seeing in high schools in this area, but also in other areas.
Just clarification, just remind me, this is done in kindergarten?
Kindergarten, yeah.
In just public schools or independent schools and public schools?
All public schools, and then independent schools can participate as they want to.
Do we know if our Squamish independent schools participate?
I actually don't know.
Yeah, we've asked that question, and we're going to get some more information as to whether local independent
It just might
schools
skew
participated.
your comparables.
Yeah, increasingly independent schools are participating on it because they can actually see the value in knowing as well. But yeah, well, I'll try to find that out as well. And then, so that was emotional maturity, language and cognitive scale. So this is, can the child come to school ready to read, write, you know, do math, that kind of thing. And low levels of vulnerability here across the school district, but also in Squamish. So kids are arriving with those sort of basic reading, writing skills. The next scale is communication skills, and this is the scale we worry about the least because it's heavily dependent on people being able to speak English. You have to be able to speak English to succeed on this scale, and when people are vulnerable on this, it's usually because they don't speak English, and they can acquire those English skills during school. So we don't worry too much about vulnerability here. And then finally, we can look at how vulnerability has changed over time. And so you can see that although that Squamish South area has had is having high vulnerability, it's actually doing better than it was doing on the last time this was done 2 to 3 years earlier. So although there's vulnerability there, there's good things happening there, and kids are actually getting less vulnerable over time. The Squamish North neighborhood is sort of the same as it was previously, and you can see Whistler's the same, and Pemberton getting a little bit better. Another way to look at this is to compare it across all the school districts. So this is the Sea to Sky School District versus the others. And so you can see if you look at emotional maturity, the school district is quite a bit further behind the other school districts, compared to some of the other scales. So that's, to me, where I would put the concerns. So ideally, I would have been able to move now into the middle development instrument and look at the health of kids in elementary school. We don't have that. We have some from neighboring school districts, though, and I can tell you that the problems, say, that they're seeing in the Sunshine Coast are that kids are having trouble developing relationships with peers and with adults. That's a few of the things they look at. And then we're starting to see problems emerge around sleep. And I'll come back to sleep in this adolescent findings, too, because I would imagine that the kids here are also having these problems. So we'll start with some of the positive findings. Substance use is decreasing over time. The last time this survey was done was 2013, and this looks at grade 7 to grade 12. All those kids during that year, and then it's done every 5 years. So they're all done sort of different ways. But so we'll be getting hopefully new data next year. I should mention that rates of alcohol and marijuana use are higher in this area than in other parts of the province, but they are decreasing. So I guess similar to the adults who have some issues with binge drinking here, we also see it in the elementary students. They have rates of alcohol and marijuana use about 10% higher than the provincial average. But as I mentioned, they're decreasing over time. So we think that as they are all across the province, but also here.
When you say youth, what age?
This is grade 7 to 12. Another thing that's really improved is school safety. There's been a lot of focus on bullying and combating that problem at schools, and I would say that it's really working based on these survey results. These looks at all different sort of areas in the schools and how safe students feel, and basically in all of these areas, they're feeling much safer than they used to. So all of this intervention in schools around bullying and self-confidence and things like that, I'd say are really helping. The only environment that's not included on this slide that I think is very important and maybe wasn't as important in 2003 is the online area. And so it may have been looked at in the survey, but it wasn't included in this slide maybe because it wasn't looked at that far back. But so that's obviously an area that we want to make sure kids are also feeling safe in. But in other physical areas, they seem to be feeling much safer. So now we'll move to areas of concern. One of the areas that we're concerned about is concussions, especially as we're trying to promote physical activity in children. It's fairly common for kids to get concussions. In this area, about 1 in 5 students gets concussion in the past year. So it's a very frequent health problem, yet many times people don't see a doctor for that problem. So it's true that there's no treatment that can be given to someone with a concussion, but documenting the injury and developing a plan for going back to physical activity, for going back to mental activity like learning is really important. And so we're trying to sort of get a better handle on how often kids are having concussions, make sure they do see health professionals when they do it, and they make sure there are plans for reintroducing learning and sport and things like that. And you can see the types of symptoms that kids report when they have these concussions, and they're serious symptoms. And so, you know, obviously things that should be, you should go for a doctor, go to see a doctor for. Losing consciousness, you know, gaps in your memory, things like that. And we're concerned about the issue of concussions because we're also concerned about mental health. This is the biggest concern of teachers and parents and school districts right now. And we are seeing some things that make us suggest that make us believe it is a significant issue. Here you see how school or adolescents in this area rate their physical health versus their mental health. So basically they rate their overall health as better than their mental health. And if you can remember back to the Squamish, the adults results, they rate their health the other way. They say, well, my mental health is great, my physical health a little bit less good, right? But children rate it the other way. So it does suggest that they are a bit more preoccupied with their mental health. They see it as more of a problem. Of course, boys and girls sort of present with different types of mental health problems. Girls presenting with more depression and anxiety type symptoms, and boys presenting more with attention deficit and hyperactivity type symptoms. But similar to concussions, many of the youth who are having these, serious symptoms are not seeking health services. And I have the second bullet in there because I'm often presenting this to parent advisory councils or things like that, and the most common reason is because they don't want their parents to know. So it's really important to create environments where kids feel they can tell their parents, or where they're not worried about telling their parents, so that they can get the help that they need. High rates of students considering suicide, attempting suicide, and those rates are going up for girl students, stable for boy students. Related to this issue of mental health is also sleep, and I'd mentioned that in the MDI data, we start seeing that kids are not getting enough sleep, and it continues into high school and probably gets worse. You can see we'd like kids in high school to be getting 9 or 10 hours of sleep, really, and you can see that only 26% of students are getting that amount of sleep. So most of them are getting, not enough sleep. And even in this data here, with students from this this region, we can see that the amount of sleep you have is related to your mental health. And now, of course, some of this is chicken and egg. When you're having serious mental health problems, you have trouble sleeping. But if you're having trouble sleeping, you're much more likely to be getting mental health problems. So these problems are very related, and so we need kids to be sleeping better. And the piece that sort of connects this all is that the way to get kids sleeping better is physical activity. And I'll skip over this slide, but we'll go to this slide. Only 17% of students in this region are getting the recommended physical activity. So this was in 2013. I would like to believe that it's better now. But that's almost none of the students getting the recommended amount of physical activity, and so it's not surprising to me that they're not sleeping and then also having mental, problems with mental illness. So interestingly, because this survey sample also includes students up to the age of 18, at that age they become under the guidelines the same as their parents, right? So, and then 61% of them meet the guidelines just like their parents do. So what this suggests to me is that, students in this, or youth in this region are basically as physically active as their parents, which is not physically active enough for adults, but these are youth who need to be much more physically active, and so they're really not physically active enough. And so basically that's causing problems with sleep. We're also seeing that, if I can go backwards here, we're also seeing problems with weight, where we're getting more students who are overweight, more students also who are underweight, and less students who are at a healthy weight. So this physical activity issue in students, I think, is a real issue. And part of the issue here also has to do with active transportation, because the students are rarely walking to school anymore. So they have to get their physical activity at school, and at the time of this survey, that clearly wasn't happening. So to sort of sum everything up from those different sources of data, basically, what do we need to work on in adults in this area? We need to sort of look at that binge drinking issue probably, and active transportation is definitely something we have to work on, and you've already started well down that path. In terms of the early years, we need to, I think the social and emotional development is really the issue that we need to look at, so to sort of build that resilience so that when students do get into high school, they're able to develop relationships, they're able to handle the stress of school, and they're able to succeed without developing mental illness. And then basically as kids get into school, we have to make sure they're sleeping, making sure they're developing these relationships, and basically becoming physically active so that they do sleep and they don't have those problems in high school. So so that's sort of some of the data that we have that can compare Squamish to other places, and the picture that we're seeing in other communities is not that different. Like I'm also for the North Shore school districts as well. These issues are very similar. Where their top concerns in youth are mental illness and mental health issues, and likewise those students are not physically active enough, not getting enough sleep, and it's that same cycle that we're seeing there. It's also communities where people are driving too much and where active transportation is the big focus. So these challenges that you're facing are basically similar to what other communities are facing.
So going back to the early childhood indicators, and we're seeing a slight trend down in the southern area, sort of static in the north, and you broke it down into different things. Are we able to, either through experiences in other communities or pinpoint where we've done policy changes or jointly or collaboratively with PCH and the school district, for example, our Healthy Routes to School, Safe Routes to School program, can we start to graph initiatives that are targeting specific areas of vulnerability, so we can actually understand, or can we see in other communities, oh, they implemented this and they saw their, direct correlations?
Unfortunately, those direct correlations have never been found, like one project and you can see the effect, but so that's from sort of a research point of view that no. But from more of a sort of community development point of view, I think communities have had success in looking at data like this and this is really only the beginning of the story. It's so high level, it doesn't really tell you a lot. And so then sort of digging into it and digging into the community knowledge that explains why some of these, because the reasons for this will be completely different in different places. And so I think that's partly what's going to happen with this Avenues of Change project, right? Is the community is going to come together from different sectors. We're going to look at this data. We're going to look at what we know about the community and how we would explain it, and then develop interventions that we think will help. And then hopefully over time we see the rates improve, but it's often very difficult to correlate those things. The Human Early Learning Partnership, though, is getting, as they collect more data, it's becoming more powerful too. So they're starting to be able to connect the data. Like right now, there's no connection. It's very ecological. It's like at this period of time, this is what it looked like. At this period of time, this is what it looks like, and you don't know whether those same kids are there, what's happened to them. Did those same kids go on and do the MDI later, and can we link those? And so they're starting to be able to do some of those things. But it's sort of early days in that. But I think it will be really helpful for Squamish to have the MDI data, for instance, because in that last wave, that wave 5, we have the EDI data for that. So these kids doing the MDI now will have been those kids. So we'll see what's happened to their emotional development, when they're assessed by this other instrument. So to some degree, we will be able to see what was done during that period, whether it helped or whether it didn't, but it's hard to know what would have happened to those kids without those interventions.
And within the 6, there's 6 indexes, right?
5.
5. You've prioritized, these are, you said one, the language one isn't as important,
Yeah.
but you prioritized.
I think it's really that social emotional, it's definitely the emotional one is the one that the whole school district is below the provincial
And they
average
might
on.
influence the other waves as well. The other, like the social emotional might actually influence the intellectual capacity, it might influence the physical.
Yeah, I mean, they can definitely all be linked, and certainly the social and emotional ones are the ones that are most closely connected. That's why it's really the emotional maturity one that the school district does worse on, but it's hard to separate it from that social piece.
Thanks. In Canada, we have trouble measuring, but globally, the research that connects land use with mental health and everything else has been done. And the land use piece, that is, I'm just looking at, I did a presentation on this, and the access to green space lowers risk of obesity, broken windows research, transit users and how they walk. The biggest one is preventable disease, as I was mentioning before, and the point that I was trying to make is that Canada doesn't offer, or BC, this region, we don't have access to preventable disease by postal code. So we can't measure because we don't have that data. And I think that as far as politics lobbying to access collaboration with healthcare, is that if we don't have that information, it's impossible to do those measurements. We should have diabetes and asthma statistics, particularly because we have an airshed problem apparently according to the data. So if we aren't measuring our incidence of asthma with our airshed quality, as we reduce our car use, we could relate it to asthma or have it now and benchmark for industries coming in. But because of the access to that data, or the lack of access to that data, it makes measuring very difficult for small communities, and also because VCH is such a broad, it needs to be done by postal code.
It begs the question, why can't we?
Yeah, that's
Well,
what.
yeah, I mean, a few things I'll say on that. I mean, it was the dearth of data that drove us to do this My Health, My Community survey, an incredibly expensive intervention that, because of 10 years of no health data collection at the federal level, we felt we had to take it on ourselves, and most health authorities didn't do that. But we did that, and now we've seen the value of it, so we're committing now to do it again, and that is very focused on communities. We make sure we collect enough to say something about Squamish and not just lump it in with a bigger area. So that's the first thing I agree with you. But there's another project that I think is looking to address this, and it's the BC Population Health or Public Health and Population Health Observatory project. And so it's being led by the BC CDC, but it is getting that healthcare data and all that data that the Ministry of Health and other organizations or other ministries collect, and to make it available to public health authorities and to the public. And so it's an organization that has been made now, and we're customers of that organization as well, but we've been very vocal that we need data at the local level. That's where, that's where the changes get made that can actually impact health. And so I think over the next year, we'll be able to see more and more of that. And I know their model is to put things up on the web so that you can access the data yourself and do different mapping. And so it is coming, yeah.
And just follow up.
Yeah, we are really
Perfect. The reading the land use change to limit our drive-throughs, and that was, when I put it forward, it was because I looked at LA, and they had knocked their incidence of diabetes and the walkability to drive-throughs and the access for school kids to be able to access fast food. And there was a distinct correlation between walkability to fast food and diabetes, and they dropped their incidence from 42% to 18%. It was a massive land use relationship to diabetes. So, and now I see more smaller communities, but I think we pretty much lead in that area of noticing that, but taking data that is showing things in other areas and making those.
We want the data so we can make decisions.
Exactly.
We want to be able to make good decisions.
Yeah.
But we don't necessarily need it to.
Yeah,
If it's shown in other
you don't need
areas,
it,
yeah, true,
yeah,
it
you
can
can
be
rely
true.
on that evidence to act, and we totally agree, but you still want to, I guess, help you develop the right priorities over time.
Peter, and then.
Yeah, just a quick question. We had a presentation on the EDI, I think it was last year, or I can't remember exactly when it was, but
Yeah.
I do remember seeing some statistics have changed and improved
Yeah.
since the last presentation. But I'm hopeful that this can get to the school board or to the PACs
Oh, yeah.
at least and share it out, because I think when the parents see these data sets, it drives the points home, and especially you bring up a very good point about the sleep. I have 2 kids in school myself that are 7 years old, and I know for a fact that some of the kids that they're talking about, they're the problematic kids in their classes. They also say that those kids tell them they're not getting enough sleep, they have issues at home, they're driving that. And I think these are things that can be addressed by parents, provided that they know that they're there and that they're seeing that these are the key pieces we can hone in on. How can we do that? How can we fix that? Because it's something I can do for my kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the school districts are the main customer of the EDI, they're the main recipient of it. But also, I work with the school districts as well. I'm like the school medical officer for the Sea to Sky School District, and so I'm currently on a Parent Advisory Council road show. So I've already done one here in Squamish, I've got one in Pemberton coming up, one in Whistler coming up, and basically to look at this health data. It's a similar presentation that I'm giving here. I don't just show them the stuff about their kids, I show them this whole spectrum again, because they have to understand that their health is affecting the kids, who's affecting, so it's similar to this, and I think parent advisory councils are my favorite, audience, because they put the school district to task, like when we as a health authority say, oh, you need to do more of this, they don't listen to us very well, but when the parents start asking for it, they really do. So yeah, so I do try to share this message.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Great, we're going to move on and do a quick chair change.
We'll try to push this till 3:30. Hopefully
Perfect, we just have a couple more slides here. Okay, over to Claire for a quick regional update.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give you a quick sense of some of the work that we already have on our work plan that we're doing either at a sub-regional level or regional level. So one of the pieces that we've been talking to the communities up and down the corridor is developing a Sea to Sky Congress. So supporting the healthy community work, but linking together Squamish, Pemberton, and Whistler. And we'll be exploring what that means with our First Nations too, but to actually have one annual event rather than focus as heavily on each community by itself, having something corridor-wide. So likely the first Congress for Sea to Sky would happen sometime in the fall. So there'll be a little bit more of that when we talk about some of the thinking for the future. We'd like to know some of the topic areas that you might be interested in.
We've had a lot of success with this on the North Shore, where we bring together the 5 North Shore municipalities, and then going forward, when you want to develop a new smoking bylaw or a thing like that, you do it in all the municipalities at the same time, and it's very consistent and people understand it, and it helps enforce the bylaw without you having to enforce it, because it just becomes the norm and stuff like that. And so there's the potential for all that type of work here too.
One of the other areas that we're really interested in moving forward with is starting to work, doing our Healthy Communities work with the First Nations communities. We did spend quite a lot of time in the Health Authority learning about municipal structures and supports, and we still are just putting our toe in because the First Nations context is so different, but we are very interested in knowing that the need is, the health inequities are highest in many of those communities. We want to make sure that we're starting that work. So that'll be a piece that we are slowly moving forward with, and Sarah mentioned First Nations Health Authority will likely be a partner, as well as Vancouver Coastal Health and the communities. The third one that's upcoming, and Mark mentioned that, is that we will be doing the My Health, My Community a second time. When we did it the first time, it was to pilot test it. People have really appreciated the results, so we will be going forward with a second round. And so again there, we're interested in feedback on what you found most helpful or what else you might like, that there'll be some room for conversation around that.
An opportunity to cross-promote, to really encourage community members to participate, I think.
But also
in that
to hear
as
from
well.
you what you didn't hear about, like what health issues you wanted to hear about but didn't really hear.
And the third piece, what we're working on that is we're working with other major organizations to try and, with all the other survey work going on, so the Vancouver Foundation, one around social connectedness, to kind of try and link our data sets a little bit better so that we can tell the story better. The next one is we've continued, a lot of this work has been fueled by the small grants. And so we've got the small grants from Plan H, and this year the focus is on social connections. The notice just came out on Friday, so we'll be sending you a letter with that. There'll be two different kinds. One is supporting resilient streets, so it's a micro grant model to support resiliency, and the other is trying to, that 4 communities across the province around kind of moving the dial around how do you improve social connectedness and what that looks like. So, and over the next year, Vancouver Coastal Health will probably also be developing our own small grant program that will link to this work. So a lot of the new pieces that we're doing, the research and development and the sort of implementation gets fueled by that. The last piece is sort of more content-based. There's been a lot of interest by communities around the importance of social connection in communities. And it's a complex subject because it covers many areas, from your close friend to the people you say hello to, how do you measure it, the role of arts and culture. There's lots of pieces to it. So it's one that we are committed to working with researchers and projects and other grants to kind of build our knowledge base, both so that we can develop some better indicators on it, but also a better sense of, right now people have a sense of how important it is, but there's very little information about what interventions work, what should we do about it. So that's some of the work that we're doing regionally to kind of improve our knowledge base on.
Great, thank you, Claire. Okay. 2 more slides. So looking ahead for priority areas for our collaboration work, 2017 to 2019, where do we go from here? There are a number of ongoing continued pieces that we want to bring forward. That is focus around the OCP, of course, through to completion, also joint work on health measures for OCP monitoring and reporting, which is a really key part of the implementation framework for the OCP. Safe routes to school travel planning continues. We're working on another 3 schools for 2017, and so that work is definitely a carry forward. And then we put our heads together to think about some of the focus areas that are emerging, that are a continuation of the, for example, ECD and food systems, but new kind of initiatives that are arising. And one of them I identified in the OCP deep dive was around working on a child strategy to address child needs and early childhood vulnerabilities through the avenues of change opportunity, and that will be presented to council at an upcoming session to see if there's interest in participating in that opportunity. And then around food systems, some of the things that are already underway, we received matching funding from the Investment Agriculture Foundation to undertake the agriculture land use inventory in 2017. And then there's also, that's to support agriculture area planning with the SLRD. And of course, there's continued work with the Squamish Food Policy Council, and which Vancouver Coastal Health staff are a part of. So those are some recommended sort of areas that are already kind of emerging and there's momentum around. And then around healthy built environment, there's definitely more work ahead that we could do and collaborate on around community health measures and a development decision framework for the OCP, age-friendly initiatives around housing, transportation, amenities and services. This is already being kind of identified and embedded in our OCP, but there's more work that we can be doing, especially around universal accessibility and development permit area guidelines. And then, as Claire mentioned, improving social connections, mental health and wellness through our policy and planning. And then finally, expanded health collaborations with Squamish Nation in particular. So those are some identified ones that we wanted to put on the table, but we're really interested in hearing and getting direction from council in terms of what you see as the key priority areas for the next collaboration cycle. So are these suggested focus areas on track? Are there others we should add? I'm going to turn it over to council for your direction and input.
Claire, did you want to add to that at all at this point?
No, I think that's,
Councillor Scott?
Thank you. I think this is all really fantastic work. It's really focused work. The food systems is with that collaboration. I think that's achievable. So I really like that. The built environment as well. The accessibility I think is a huge problem in our community, as well as I'd like to look at flood construction level as we move forward in our OCP, because I really, the benefits outweigh the deficits of removing more flood construction level. Like we look at accessibility, it's a huge issue. We won't be able to build accessible housing or seniors housing if we continue with the huge flood construction level. The social connections and the mental health. One thing I worry about is we do have mental health issues in our region, and the accessibility to mental health is not as well supported in this area, and our access to mental health services are limited for our public, and they do have to travel down the highway, which is a huge prohibition to achieving wellness. So I wonder what we could do better as a council to support. It's provincial, so how do we work with that to make sure that our public's taken care of? If it's such a huge issue with our youth, those youth can't access services in our community. So how do we lobby as a council, or how do we make better, maybe it's lobbying to UBCM, or I don't know how that's done. I know it is a focus of the provincial government right now, but we don't see it in funding or transportation accessibility to the Lower Mainland so people can gain access to services.
Yeah, I mean, the main, I think, venue for that type of advocacy is the local government liaison meetings that we have, that the Health Authority has with local governments, because that's more meant to be focused on health services. Through this partnership, we're not supposed to work on health services, but if we want to work on those same issues, and that's why we're trying to work on them from the view of prevention, and it's a less, but we can
more
still,
affordable.
Yeah, but we do need to have those conversations as well. I mean, across the province, but also in this region.
Thank you.
And I just want to make sure anyone who's in the audience who wants to contribute to this conversation, please come and join us, put your hand up, sit at the table. Jason?
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in this idea of the air quality, because I think that one of the things that's worth mentioning, of course, the wood burning fire stove wood stoves and all of that is a local problem, but the other problem is that we have a major highway cutting through the middle of our town, and so I wonder how we could have data that would be useful and some interventions so that we better understand how we can mitigate that, and also advocate to the province so that as we grow, we're going to be able to put a fast track on some of the other transportation alternatives, whether they be rail or water-based or anything else like that, and to say, we need to do this, or we're going to have, a smog problem eventually, or an air quality issue in our community. And then I also was thinking too, in terms of how we do our development approvals along the highway, and reflecting on the fact that recently we used to have a big stand of trees that was sort of between the highway and a subdivision, and I guess it's highways or some property owners, they all just got taken out, right? And so do we as a district need to have some protections in place and even some enhancements in place to say, no, we need a buffer there of some sort to, obviously, the air is the air and it travels, but there are some things you can do in terms of spacing, and also even just saying, like, we are not gonna put residential development within X hundred meters of, because we know, I've seen data on that, if you're living really close to concentrated. So some of those things I think would help us as a district to help our citizens.
Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, we're definitely happy to work on issues like that, and our health protection department is happy also to look at any plans that you guys are developing in terms of the built environment and where you're thinking of siting things and where, how you're developing, because we often do have perspectives on that and how you're going to handle waste or how you're going to link up to water or sewage and all these things. So we're happy to look at those plans.
I always enjoy having this presentation and the updates, because it talks about the people and not just the buildings, which is what we spend a lot of our time talking about. So I'm glad to see that the priority areas haven't really shifted, because I think we made gains and now we need to reinforce those gains. The things that I'm curious about in terms of active transportation and building on that is once we finish the schools, what is the work we do as a community to maintain behavior change or to make sure there's behavior change? Because, in talking to the HBC coordinator, I'm not sure we really thought that through. So how do we make sure that active transportation becomes part of going to school once we build these routes? So as new kindergartners come in, as new children come into the school system, how do we introduce them to, and their parents, to the idea of, we have safe routes to school, and it is about active transportation, so we're constantly coming back to that message, because we've invested the time, and we will invest the money over the next few years, but we've got to make sure all these new parents, not just the ones that participated in the past 2 years, understand.
I think that's why it's so great that you have this focus in your OCP on active transportation, because like the greatest influence on those kids coming into school is the parents, right? Like, so if the family is biking around everywhere, the kids will bike to school, but if the family is driving everywhere, then the kids are going to be driven everywhere. So, so it's about, it's not to help the safe routes to school, we have to help the whole community sort of thing.
And I think the only other area where I have a lot of curiosity, because we have a young community, but we also have more seniors building in our demographic as a community, is their active transportation and being comfortable with using our trails and accessing them, and also the piece around social connectedness concerns me. So in living in another city, the parks often had shelters and they had gas barbecues, so anyone could go. You could meet your friends there and you could make it like a social. I'm not sure that we are, in our built environment, building connecting spaces and social opportunities. The other thing that I was thinking about today in conversation with someone was a kid's guide to Squamish. And you know, we all have our favorite trails, but I know when wandering the trails with my kids, you know, they've named certain trees and there's certain rope swings that they go to and there's pump tracks sort of hidden in the trails around Squamish. And if you're new to town and you don't know really where to take your kids yet, you know, it'd be interesting to have that sort of kids guide in the same way that we've done like a children's charter, but have the kids tell us how they want to play. And if you look at some of our schoolyards, you know, the kids play in the forest around Garibaldi Highlands. Kids play in a little patch of forest at the back of Mountain Elementary School. You know, they will spend some time on playgrounds, but they are adventurers by heart, and we have to make their parents feel comfortable that they can go and explore those places safely, and other kids will be there. And so anyway, that was, so I'm just sort of reinforcing this sort of freedom of children and their resiliency and their ability to move around our community safely, or some of those things. But I also don't want to forget about our idea that we want to design our community for 8 to 80. And we focused a lot on children, and I don't think we should take our eye off that ball, but I also don't want to have our older population sort of get lost.
You've made so many good points there.
Sorry.
But the one thing I'll say about that accessibility, I mean, designing for children often does design for seniors, and likewise designing for seniors often does design for children. That's one of the amazing things about that, around transportation. Where should I say next? I mean, that whole idea of that free play is something we do really want to encourage. That's great for physical activity, we know, but it's also great for mental health as well, like letting kids take those risks, letting them figure out how far they can go and then get back and get confident, or have to talk to somebody else to get home, and then they, you know, like, we know that's super important. And so I love that idea of the kids' guide to being outdoors and using Squamish. And City of North Van just recently did that, the CMP for me. Yeah, it's more about kids in the city, but this would be more about kids outside. And I think that would be great. And I think other municipalities would love that. And you would, like, if we develop something like that, it would be well received for sure.
Makes me think we need to join the project this year, and so maybe we get it.
Yeah, get their art in there and their pictures or video.
It's also interesting, I think about how liability and insurance and sort of rules, blanket rules have kind of sterilized our environment and taken away, like they've actually designed to protect this, but they're also taking away and making it more vulnerable over here, and we make these decisions in isolation. Well, the insurance company likes this plastic thing much better than this old stump. And operations likes this plastic thing because they can clean it better than this old stump. But that old stump provides all this value added that we underestimate in terms of our evaluation of our decision. Doug?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the work you're doing on this. And to confirm something that I've always believed, and that is the value of exercise and activity. And the concern I have, although I don't have children, but you read constantly and hear about the less and less activity, because now activity is a computer game as opposed to running around kicking a soccer ball or something like that. And so how do we get back to the other way? Building on what Councillor Elliott said, I was going to make the same comment that, you know, I think of the street that you and I live on, Sarah, where the recreation area is the street. And if parents or adults want to have a social connection and chat, it happens on the street. And we're able to get away with it on that street because it's a dead end and there's little traffic, but not so in most parts of the district. And so when you look at these things, if we're talking OCP issues, then I think perhaps more focus even than we have now on community gathering places. I think of the Greens in England and so forth, and places where people can come together, where kids can play. It's not just some place to take your dog for the toilet cycle, which kind of defeats the purpose. So we have to be very clear about that. But then sometimes it means you have to fence them. But I think that kind of thing, because the activity, you know, exercise and activity for me is not just organized sports. It's kids throwing a frisbee around or something like that, or just an ad hoc kicking a soccer ball or something like that. But just gets them out running around, breathing fresh air, and so that kind of design element in our community, I think, is important. And we've had a number of zonings in the last little while of, especially as we densify, because we've had a number of zonings in the last little while where we've had a townhouse development that's almost been like a gated community. You know, it's a perimeter of townhouses, and they look inward and they have a central common for themselves, but there's really no connectivity physically with the next one or the ones down the street and so forth. And so that kind of build that kind of connectivity into these things, assume that there's going to be something next door to it. How do you, present that development as part of a larger thing? And also, I think it means, preserving some more natural spaces that are accessible. I know when we built the Ray Peters Trail, we took great pains to design that trail so it ringed the area, because going into the center of a large forest is intimidating for a lot of people. And so we kept it close to the road, so there was visibility of the road, yet we were still in the forest. And so you can have green spaces and you can have forested areas that are substantially wild and with the wildlife corridors and so forth, and still can be accessible and not intimidating for people to go into of any age. So that to me are the types of things that I think our OCP can look at and consider when we want to.
That's great. We've definitely incorporated that into some of the policy, but also in development permit area guidelines. But another way to focus that is around improvements to public spaces and parks and parklets, and trying to program spaces a little bit more purposefully by adding picnic tables and chairs and really setting up the social gathering through our park and street design and street furniture and things like that. So I think there's lots of opportunity there, and I think it's just about being more purposeful and investing in some of those elements to really encourage gathering and interaction.
Thanks,
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation. It's always great to see something about people, as Karen said, instead of buildings, collaboration, and talking about healthy communities. As you know, we're the third fastest growing community in BC, and certainly within BCH's purview, we are the largest and fastest growing community. And so commensurate with that, I'm desirous of seeing what BCH has in plan for their facilities. I know we are hoping to see Karen Wilson here with a kind of a presentation for us with that regard, because I don't need to tell you that our facility is in dire need of some attention. So I'll just leave it at that, because I know this isn't the venue for that at the moment, but I did want to throw it out there and kind of cast that gauntlet down.
Even within public health, we recognize that your community is growing. There's so many young families, so many young children, so many immunizations to give and stuff like that. And so we're trying to build up our team here as well. But and so Karen Olson knows about that. But we're in conversation about this stuff, so she will be up here to talk about this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. I've got a recommendation for you at closing. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting because what we need is, bring a recommendation though. We talk about, parks. And just I'll put out a few little ideas. And when we were talking about designing that park on Government Road there a little while ago, I said, well, we should put some boulders and some logs in there. Well, no, we have to have a playground here. And then Karen says, the lovely thing about the kids, when they play, they go off into the bush. They don't, sometimes, So we didn't look at that. And we don't have that written down in any document, so that when we design parks, we want to make sure we keep green space. So there's a big green space there, and we're going to flatten it and put it in a park. So we need to change a lot of words in our planning to make us look at that. Otherwise, we'll just overlook it, because in our policy, it doesn't say, if there's green space, use 50% of that. So the park should be 50% green space and 50% playground area. We don't have that. And then when we were talking, Karen was also talking about park benches and everything that you talked about. And one of the things that made me so nervous about Cleveland Avenue and the way the developments is coming on to us now is we're not putting any nicety. We don't have any niceties written into any of our policy or anything to capture that on Cleveland. And that's one of the big fears that I had as the 6-story and 5-story and 4-story apartment blocks were powering in through there. We still can't stop them. If every empty lot on Cleveland Avenue came in tomorrow with a plan for a 4 to 6 story building, we would accept it. We would say, well, wait a minute, no, we want this corner to be a people place. We want to have some connections through the blocks so that it makes it more, and so, I hear all this, but hopefully your recommendation would be to direct you to fill some of those, rewrite some of that stuff sooner than later.
And that's why we've taken this lens so that we can layer it into the OCP, and the OCP then informs all those other things.
Well, I'm talking about now.
I know that's the challenge, is that we're in this no man's land. We gotta continue on. Go ahead.
That all, we talk about park space and how we use our parks and everything, but to me, Squamish is one of the greenest communities with accessibility in the outdoors everywhere, and where we fall down is our accessibility to that. Public transportation into our parks, our bike lanes aren't separated. If we want a true 880s Gil Palmalosa community, we need to actually invest, focus our investment on getting kids to the green spaces. You can build green spaces and have public spaces everywhere, and to its point, we need economy as well. You can't have every place having a green space. You need to build the accessibility of the green space, and having raised 2 kids, I have a teenager now, she rides her bike everywhere. She doesn't have that fear. I grew up in downtown Toronto cycling, and you just, if you grow up in that environment, you can use your bike anywhere. But to build spaces where people feel comfortable getting to the economy and to the green space, that's in our community, it's one connected road. Government Road goes from green space to green space. And it's flat and it's lit. And I always think about that, and there's all, you get engineering discussing the planning, there's always there's a big problem. And I go to other communities and it's yep, stick bollards and there you go, done. And, I know there's problems and I know there's issues, but focusing our attention on connectivity of communities so that 8 to 80 can move around safely from economy to green space to mountain bike trails, which we just heard. How many trails? We have more trails than most communities. So if we can't get people to these areas, then that's where we fall down, because people become fearful of actually leaving to get to the spaces. And we can put public spaces up, and we have a ton of public spaces in our downtown. But for me, for my kids, as we become busy and there's cars racing up and down, if we don't have safe ways to get kids, sidewalks and bike lanes, they're not going to get out of their car. They're going to drive their kids to the parks, and then hence we have a parking problem. So we need to actually, the active transportation piece that staff have in there, for me, is the key piece of building a healthy community, is getting people out on their bikes and thinking about, it's more convenient to get on my bike and ride to a place than it is to hop in my car. Because it begats each other, the feeling unsafe in a community because there's so many cars and then not having an accessible way to travel to the spaces.
Yeah, and that's why we focused on active transportation. We've been very diligent for quite a while on that. And we're making some strides. Costs a lot of money, but we've made some good commitments there. So I want to thank you very much. There's a motion up there. I'll move that motion if there's a second by Councillor Chappell. I think this motion speaks specifically to, I think, the sort of the crux of the issue, which is we can't do this alone. We're trying to make good decisions so the built environment, the community is affecting positive health outcomes, mental health, physical health in the community in general, but we can't certainly do it alone. And we need, I'd like to make sure the school district is in there, because I think that's a fundamental. Maybe I'll amend my motion to add the school district and our independent schools, because I think there's several hundred kids in independent schools too. So, but that's it, collaboration. We can't do this alone. We need people to be engaged. We need the experts to be helping inform us. We need to be able to take this data and then actually mine it for meaningful outcomes a little bit better. I think we're on a really good path. And I really look forward to seeing how this is going to layer into the OCP, because we have all these pieces that we're putting together: the children's charter, the food stuff, the active transportation, we're getting, I think where we are lacking is real prescriptive, innovative stuff on the built environment, making them welcoming, making them healthy, making them connected, all those things. So I think that's where we really come into effect, and I think that's where we really need to sort of up our policies. Simple things like creative crosswalks, simple things like places for seniors to feel comfortable just hanging out. Making kids feel safe goes a long way. So look forward to the next step in this. It feels like pretty progressive work, and it feels like it's foundational at this point, and we're just at the beginning of being able to sort of figure out how to really make some meaning out of it and then move forward.
Well, just, is there any way of extracting some of the things that we already know and getting into some of the planning that we're already doing?
Well, some of that's already happening to quite a good degree.
Some of it is happening already, and some of it is going into the draft of
Yeah.
city policies.
That's right.
Awesome. Anyone from the audience want to add to this conversation at this point? Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Anyone who participated in this, thank you. And
Thank you.
Oh,
you want to say something?
You should vote.
I'm going to vote on. Just wanted to
Okay.
make sure I had any input that was out there. So I'll call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? If any? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Any closing remarks or anything? Thank you so much for coming.
opportunity.
Why don't we take a 4-minute break?
Please enjoy some.
We are in our Community Development Standing Committee of Tuesday, April 4th. And we're on item 5.2, proposed changes to mixed-use District 1 rezoning in the business park. And please, anyone in the public who wants to participate in the conversation, it's completely open, and please just put your hand up, or you have to speak when you're at the table, because the microphone's there, so just let me know.
Thank you, Chair. So we're bringing back the mixed-use District 1 zone for further discussion with committee. The first reading on this bylaw happened on March 7th, and it was followed by stakeholder engagement with most of the property owners over their agents in the area. The intent of the proposed changes from the draft that was given first reading was to make it more flexible, to have a mixed-use development happen, more feasible, and further incentivize the provision of rental units. So there's been a number of changes that we are proposing. The first one is realignment of areas between Area 1, 2, and 3. Area 3 now extends across over to Queensway, and Area 2 drops down halfway to Pioneer Way. The rationale for realignment was to sort of bring that neighborhood commercial feel with larger density across the line. That's kind of the entrance into the business park. And also with Area 2, it wasn't a big departure in terms of permitted uses between Area 1 and Area 2, but Area 2 allows for slightly a bit more density. There was an increase in residential GFA to allow for up to 60% of the second story to be live-work units. So would be a requirement to have 40% of the second floor to be office space or other uses, and then the remainder of that floor could be live-work units. So they could be residences. They could be residences with working businesses in them, or it could be a full floor of employment space. So again, adding more flexibility. A single setback was applied to Government and Queensway at 4 meters. This allows enough room for those streets to continue to function as floodways, and that's the case in Business Park. Initially, we had a stepping back effect at Government Road. What we have determined, looking more into this, is that it would prove to be more expensive to build, and also there's a potential compromise with what we've seen with leaky condos. So every time you have a break in the building, it gets more expensive to insulate, and it opens it up to more weather type impacts. So what happened is we've gone from 3 meters to 4 meters on the setback, and now it's just a single setback. We've also proposed an option to build to zero lot line on interior and rear lot lines. So this would allow for buildings to either go right across the property line or come at zero lot line to property line. You're still gonna have to have all the pathways around it and make sure that emergency services and traffic can flow around those buildings. But it becomes more practical for developments to kind of share that in-between space. The story cap has been removed from all areas, and so now you could move around the residential density within each one of those areas, not outside of it, but within each one of those areas. So you can consolidate it all in one place and no longer be tied by a single story. It allows for more flexibility, and it is potentially a better solution than just asking for the development to conform to that kind of tiering effect. There's been an incentive introduced to common open space, so we're recognizing that this is not just a residential area. This is going to be a primary employment area that has parking, loading requirements, and there may not be a lot of space for open space for those accessory residential units. So what we're proposing is to introduce an incentive to activate that open space. And so the standard 30% of area that we currently have would go down to 15%, but you have to have a combination of three kind of pieces that activate that open space. So that's like exercise equipment, a play area, like play structures, or a gathering space. So it's another incentive to what we just talked about, is not just having those lawn areas, but actually activating them. There are other changes that may be warranted that we haven't captured in the draft that's put forward in front of you. And one of them was residential visitor parking. So in our parking requirements, we require 0.25 of a parking stall to be provided for each residential unit. Those parking spaces could likely be combined with the commercial parking requirement, because they kind of happen at different times of the day. And there will be fairly significant parking requirements on the commercial side. So there really isn't any reason why you couldn't combine the two. And then the other option would be permission to move around the second floor employment space to other floors. Right now it's just at the second floor. There really isn't any reason why we couldn't put it above. It's unlikely that this would actually happen, but it just adds another layer of flexibility. And that's it. I've just added the table of uses, which hasn't changed.
That's great.
Thank you. When I was reading this, I had a couple of questions, and one was the definition of live workspace versus just a plain apartment, and I didn't see that anywhere, and I'm not sure what differentiates one from the other. Are there certain requirements?
Yeah, so it is defined in the zoning bylaw, and it is really, you could be a straight apartment, or it could be a place where you can have a business that's more than just a home occupation. So you could have essentially most of your apartment is an office, and then a small
Is it the zoning bylaw?
It is, yes.
I didn't see it. Okay, and the other is with respect, it's partly a question, partly a comment, and this goes back to when this first came before council. Some of the feedback we were getting at that time was with respect to the amount of office space in this particular location or in the business park generally. And whether that might draw it away from the downtown area, which is notionally the prime office space, not exclusively, but significantly. And so one thought I had was reducing the amount of office space as a suggestion, just to the commercial area, Area 3, for example, and take it out of the other two areas and allow that extra space to either just disappear, so you reduce the size of the buildings, or to become residential, which we need, or live work, so there is an employment component to it, or somehow increase the industrial capacity of it. But just, do we really need that much office space in that particular location? I can certainly understand it in the commercial area, because you can understand the little commercial hub there, some second floor office space for a dentist or a doctor or something like that that might be appropriate there. But the rest of it, I'm not so sure about that, unless you want office space that is sort of part of an industrial business or some business that's there because you need a place for the filing cabinet and so forth. But apart from that, just to throw it open to an office space, I question that part.
If I may answer, so we have reduced the second floor requirement to it being up to 40%. And so if you can hit 40%, then the remainder of that space, 60%, can be live-work units. So I guess the other part of this is, you know, we are, hopefully most of our office space comes to downtown. But I think in the long run, we need to make sure that we're building employment space throughout our community. If we're adding all of this residential stock, there may be a competition right now between different areas for office space. But I think in the long run, we need to make sure that inside the core neighborhood areas, that we have all of those services provided, or a space for all those services to be provided.
Does that answer your question?
A little bit, yeah, thank you.
Ed, Lincoln.
Yeah, thank you. So I heard you say story cap has been removed from all areas?
Yes.
So you can go 4 or 5 stories over all these 1, 2, or 3?
Yes, you could, if you can fit all the employment requirements. So the residential GFA, gross floor area, is tied to the commercial gross floor area. So it's always, the more employment space you build, the more residential you can build. And so in certain areas, like Area 1, your GFA, residential versus commercial, you know, is much lower than in Area 3, where the density is higher on the residential side. But yes, potentially you could, even in Area 2, have a 5-story building in one area of that whole area that consolidates all of the residential density.
And then if you go to the map showing the 1, 2, and 3 there, I don't know, is that BC Rail property to the east, or is that a road right of way?
That is a BC Rail right away.
There's not a road going through there. See, so then on that note, I kind of don't understand why we want to put a 5-story building right up against the arm that comes down the railroad. You know, like to me, the higher end buildings and the higher density should go around the corner where all the traffic's going. I mean, you know what I mean? And that little strip, I know one of the reasons we were having trouble with some of those areas there is because that road going through there, when you have a lot of traffic coming out of the north yards there, it's going to be really hard for cars to get in and out of there with properties there. So you put a big commercial building right beside where the arm comes down and the train comes in, nobody's going anywhere.
That property has 2 accesses. It also has an access off of Pioneer Way.
Well, there will be a road going through then. I mean, that's my point.
There will most likely will be. The other factor here is the setback from that property line on the west side. There's a 15-meter setback requirement, which chews up almost half the lot. So you'll probably end up with a road and parking on that side of the property all along that railway. And then you've got the road that goes on parallel to the property line that's owned by BCR or the province. And then you have the railroad tracks. So there's quite a bit of separation when you include those 2 parameters.
You know, just as long as BC Rail continues to keep that as an access, then, I mean, 15 meters is not a road. You have parking and on a 15 meters, that's not a road. 60, you need 20 meters.
Well, for a strata road, you could have a 6-meter road. That's a strata road standard.
45 feet. Okay. Anyway, I just found it kind of strange that we'd be putting density down that end instead of on Queensway and in the corner, because the majority of the traffic's heading down Queensway. So, I would have thought you'd have tried to encourage more of the, stores and coexistence along this edge here rather than over in that corner.
I think that's what this is doing. Jonas, do you
It
want
is.
to?
Well, not based on the pictures.
So
Based
the,
on the pictures, that's area 2.
So when you look at Area 3, you see now it goes all the way to Queensway. It didn't before, and you made that great comment at the last meeting. So we are actually bringing forward that neighborhood commercial feel across to Queensway.
Yeah, okay, yeah, on that side. But you know what I mean? We're holding it down that end, and it's just, to me, it's logical to put it down Queensway instead of down to a dead end. If that road was gonna go through North Yards and there was gonna be all sorts of development down there someday, yes. But we're putting the main commercial street facing a road that's got a railroad crossing and a huge industrial, instead of facing it to where all the traffic goes. So anyway, I made my point.
No, I understand your point, and I think to answer that is that in Area 2 we have more industrial type users, which will probably reflect of what's happening on the other side of Queensway, which right now is industrial. So the reason why the map is the way it is, I think, is we wanted to allow for some flexibility, a considerable amount of flexibility. It is a mixed use district where I think we haven't had a lot of experience with it here in Squamish, and we want to kind of put it out there and see what happens.
Well, I guess, yes, I'll say it once again, I still am surprised that we're putting the highest density down the dead end instead of around the corner where all the traffic's coming.
I'm trying to understand what you mean by dead end. You mean?
Well, we're in the North Yards. Who's going down to the North
Well,
Yards?
hopefully, quite a few people.
Yeah, but when the train comes in, are they going down to the North Yards? No, because the traffic's backed all the way up through the intersection. And when the big trucks are coming, how are you gonna turn into a little short driveway in there to get into commercial? And you got
Go around
600
it.
cars going down Government Road and 40 cars going, anyway. You see here? That's the commercial. And here's the road, there's the railroad
I
tracks.
understand the diagram. I'm trying to understand what you're saying.
Well, we're putting the commercial here.
You're putting it all the way along there, yes. That's according to the plan.
Yes, and I'm just saying it should go there. And then
Okay.
just along the tracks, so all up against the tracks, you've got the lower commercial buildings. Up against the tracks, all commercial. You don't have as many apartments looking over the railroad tracks. You have more of them looking, and when you say on Queensway, across the street is industrial, it's industrial now. Doesn't mean it's always going to be industrial. It could be a science tech center. We haven't got there yet. And if we're starting to create an area here, we should go with the flow. Okay, so then I'll drop that. On to parking.
I think we should explore that idea. If that's all right. Don't want to,
Yeah,
council
well,
members to
I don't
weigh into
know.
that. I don't want, because, and I'm trying to understand it, so I'm open to it. I think, and maybe I get this wrong, I'm looking for people in the public to help me out here. I think some of the logic in why we put Area 3 at the north end was to create that residential buffer with the existing and allow some residential to sort of, and then stage down the residential as it entered the business park from a geographical point of view.
Yes.
And provide some neighborhood commercial, so the businesses over in the North Yards can come and get a coffee right there, and people in the neighborhood can do that sort of thing. And then graduate it down into more of the form that's in the business park and the uses that are in the business. So have a, and I think, I'm trying to, and I understand the logic of not putting a ton of residential density maybe at that corner, because it's a noisy corner. And so there might be some design issues with the building, I don't know, but I think this was designed this way to be, trying to be as fair as possible to all the different landowners as well.
That's right.
And so I think that was some of the, and I'm not sure if I agree with that or not, I'm just saying I think that was some of the logic between sort of banding it this way as opposed to this way, so that all the big lot owners have opportunity to see value in their property. Here?
Yeah, something like when I look at this, definitely where there's two things going on here, because we're wrapping the neighborhood commercial around the corner to link the two neighborhoods, right? But we're also looking to take advantage of potentially some affordable housing in line with the commercial use. And I think where Area 3 is right now, I'm in agreement that if it wrapped around further, it would be a smoother transition with the neighborhood commercial, because why wouldn't we take advantage of the business park being able to utilize some of that neighborhood commercial? It's better for those businesses. I also see access issues at that intersection, and so if Area 3 wraps around a little bit more like an L, you're going to open up a little bit more feasibility for access points that can work with traffic and whatnot without relying on roads to be built from other ends of the site. That said, leaving Area 3 where it is on the far left-hand side by the west perimeter of the 5 parcels there, I don't see the harm in it, because feasibility is going to drive, right? It's going to drive more quasi-industrial space, which is allowed in the zone. So I think you're going to end up with maybe some personal service establishment, probably quasi-industrial on the ground floor there, with them taking advantage of residential. So even though that density is there, the market will probably drive the forum to go one direction or another. And you know, you'd have to think, and I mean, if you end up with a rental building there, great. You're probably not going to see a residential strata there. So I like where it sits across the top right now, but I do agree, if it comes around a little bit further, you're going to have an opportunity to integrate the neighborhood commercial in particular better, and then you are trying to go from south to north with a bit of a higher mix of residential coming from Pioneer to the other side on Government. So I think that's been accomplished the way the site's laid out, but from a feasibility standpoint too, this was discussed when we were doing stakeholder feedback, and there is natural property lines that also come into play here, so it could get a little bit goofy with land ownership, but it might be simpler or work a little better if it's slightly curved around the corner, right? But it's a tricky one. I don't know what the impact is from a land ownership perspective at that point, right? But I think feasibility will push that neighborhood commercial around the corner, and you won't get, you know, 7-Eleven or a grocery store, a video store, which doesn't exist anymore, by the train tracks over there, right? I'm thinking.
Go ahead.
Well, you know, I agree somewhat. You know, the property across the street, which is all residential right now, I know someday, you know, people are going, well, somebody's gonna buy up all those old houses and then they're put in a big block, potentially, or might get down zoned to industrial, and maybe there'll be an industrial building beside the tracks, which makes sense. I'm just pretending to see the driveways coming in and out. And, you know, that new beautiful intersection we have coming in there, and so all the people that are living up near the bridge, they go, oh, I'm gonna just whip down to the store and grab something. And they come whipping down, and the trains across the tracks, and so they go, well, I guess I'm gonna go down Queensway, I'll go downtown now, I'm not gonna sit in the lineup.
I don't understand.
Well, when the arm comes down over the railroad tracks, it's backed up from there, right past all those buildings. And that's the entrance in and out. So pushing it around and going down Queensway, I mean, even the way we've got it right now in Queensway, like that's dangerous pulling a driveway on a Queensway on that arc for a 5-story building with stores around there. I mean, what are people gonna park out front and run into the store, or it's just, I just think it's not the optimum. Now, I guess if we're being sympathetic to property owners and trying to give them higher, better uses, I guess that's one thing. So you gotta go up there.
Yeah, come on up, Jason.
Oh, ours a property owner. I knew we'd get someone up there.
I was asking that.
Okay. I know, but we're on this topic. If it's on this topic, go ahead.
Yeah, it seems like we're kind of caught
No,
up.
Paige, sorry, you're not up. Karen.
So I have similar questions to Ted, because the train does shunt there sometimes for 20 minutes, half an hour, and the traffic backs up. And so I'm concerned about access along that part of Government Road there. Because Ted's right, traffic doesn't move for a long time. I'm also curious why we pulled Area 3 all the way over there. I get that there's natural setbacks, but, you know, when there was a townhome proposal there, I think council was concerned about the conflict of putting that right by the rail yards and trying to keep that industrial area in the rail yards heavy industry. I mean, that's what we're trying to protect here, and that's why this proposal came forward, is because we're trying to protect industrial land and provide a bit of flexibility for the landowners there. But I'm not sure for me that we've got the balance right. So I guess my question is, on that, how do we, on Ted's point, how do we imagine access? You know, if we've got trucks that need to deliver here, but we've got land ownership lines that are going north-south, and some of them stop up here, and some of them are deeper. Like, how are we imagining this all gets pieced together? It's like a big Tetris project, but like, how are we imagining flow if people aren't going to consolidate lots, if they're just going to develop one and then another? How are we imagining that people are moving from Pioneer Way up to Government Road, in from Queensway? I can't imagine that right now. And I agree with Ted, it's problematic to have entrances off that end of Government Road.
Do you want to speak to that? Not speak to Karen's geekiness on Tetris, but everything else is up.
Sure. So like I said, the site that's next to the railway tracks has two accesses. It has one off of Pioneer Way, one off of Government. Living next to a railroad is kind of a reality in Squamish. You know, our downtown is segmented by the railroad, and we get stuck with it from time to time. But I think there is an alternative way to get around there, and I think that area is only going to be a road because of the 15-meter setback. The allowance to build a zero lot line, and it is also an allowance to build across the areas. So you're likely going to see buildings going across property lines and those area 1, 2, 3, and the only difference will be the uses in those buildings and the density in those buildings. And the access points, you know, just because area 3 goes across to Queensway doesn't mean that that site has to be accessed right off of in area 3. The access could be in area 2 for that lot, and same for area 3. You know, the access to that top part could be through Pioneer Way, for the other lots. So I think what we try to do is provide as least control as possible without compromising the neighborhood vision that we're trying to establish here, so that the developers can figure out what works for this site. But I think it's going to be market driven of what can happen here. And I think railroad is just something that we all have to live with. We're putting in residences in this area as an accessory use to the industry. It's not going to be heavy industrial. Any portion of the site, it's going to be medium to light industry.
It's the other side that I'm concerned about. It was
across the tracks.
Across the tracks. And the tracks. It's the reason we didn't want high density right in that lot closest to the railway tracks, is because we didn't want to create any conflicts, which gave us the freedom to put whatever we wanted on the other side of the tracks as that area developed. And that's the piece that I want to make sure we protect, is that we don't create a situation where we've got residential conflict, so that we can look at, you know, large-scale manufacturing across the railroad tracks with something that does create noise and dust, because that's the only place we have left really to put it, unless we free up land in some future scenario on the Chikai Fan. So, so maybe the solution is to, you're right, it is sort of limited by a 15-meter setback. But I'm not sure why 2 doesn't sort of carry up that western side.
Okay, I've got Susan, Jason, and Dave.
And actually, a lot of my points have been made, and you know, I think it's hard because we haven't had these uses before. It's really hard for us to imagine mixed-use projects, and I think that if you have commercial on the ground floor and proper accessibility through other areas, I think it could work. And higher apartments, there's technology now that deals with noise. So it is a reality. It will be lower income housing, and it will be people that are living above their workshops. And it is, it's done in other communities really well. There's lots of noise limiting building techniques that you can use, and it is only once in a while. But I would be concerned with Ted's, like the intersection there, I do think is a problem, but I think those things could be addressed through planning.
Yeah, I like the revision. I think that it's got lots of flexibility, and what it does is it helps us as a district use what the market is doing to actually deliver on some of the things that we have in terms of, you know, delivering commercial space that really in the market right now is not feasible unless you have that residential component. I also think that I suspect that the intersection between Queensway where it meets Aspen, I suspect over the long term that's going to be reconfigured given the fact that Aspen is sort of like a little bit of an alleyway, and that will probably be redesigned anyway. And then I also want to remind everyone about our Pioneer Way expansion. I think that's going to take a lot of pressure off this because the people who are not coming from the North Yard, the people coming through the rest of Squamish will bypass that area. So, you know, all of those things considered, you know, I would agree that, you know, at the development permit stage, we would have to really look carefully at the detailed design, but certainly I think that, you know, it may be the case that there may be some of the workspaces where it's people who maybe they do make more noise and they'd be happy to be in a place where they can make more noise and accept the fact that they are living next to a railway that it does have noise. So I think it's a good sort of meeting of multiple objectives.
Okay, this goes back to Ted's comments with the railway, and Jason just brought up one of them. We see with our property that the main entrance is going to be on Pioneer for a couple of reasons. One, the realignment of Government Road is going to shift the traffic flows. But the other one is that we have a 30-meter setback from railway crossing. So we don't really have the option of making a primary entranceway on our side of the property on Government Road. It's going to have to come in from Pioneer, unless we can work with someone who owns the neighboring property, in which case it can shift over, you know, quite a bit. But, you know, that's one of those things that with the flexibility, you know, there's only really 2 major landholders here now and a couple of smaller ones that we can work through these things.
Ted and Susan, and please come on up and share.
Yeah, well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that part, that you're not planning on coming through there. But on that, you know, as you said, that some of those lots might be accessed through other properties. And if there's only 3 property owners, there could be an internal road. You could even come to a 4-way stop instead of a 3-way stop and go through that property. I mean, you could treat, there could be another road go through the middle of that, open it all up and make it really nice in there with a courtyard and a parking lot. And all the property owners would just share the square foot price and blah, blah, blah. Because to me, that would be really nice.
Yep.
But, well, I'm just saying that if we get a road going through the middle of that, then that changes the whole dynamics of it. And nobody's gonna be backing up at that rail crossing. So if the property owners will get together and agree on the access coming from Pioneer Way in and then going that way, that's great.
Exactly. Mr. Rancer actually brought up a good point in that the access into 39660 has to be 30 meters away from the rail crossing by the CN standards.
Master plan.
I have Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Race.
Thank you. I just wanted to address the point that Councillor Race brought up of drawing business away from the downtown. I think that's a bit of a fallacy these days. I think that our community likes the walkability to the business park, and then the business park has so many different uses now, and we've allowed commercial to go in there, we've allowed a whole bunch of different uses in the business park now, and it is central to our community. You know, it is accessible from all neighborhoods in the business park and accessible by transportation. So having this, it's why I completely support this. And you know, right now we are restricting downtown and we are building density in the downtown, but not office space. So I know that's may change in the future, but it doesn't look like this council's appetite for building in the downtown is actually going to come to realization. So the downtown right now is looking at I know many business owners, I speak as a business owner in the downtown, that has to look outside. That has to look outside into the business park for office space because it's the only place that office space is being built. So it is going to be that when you want accessible office space, you're gonna have to go to the business park. So until our downtown redevelops, and right now we have density but no office space in downtown. So I look forward to having other options for business owners and innovation. And the other thing is, can you go to the use map?
Can I just remind council that this is first reading and it still has to go through a legislative process? So make sure you are keeping an open mind.
Oh, absolutely. So R&D, why are we restricting, why would, R&D was the only one that really stood out to me as something that why would we restrict the uses? And some of these, again, we're doing this mud zoning, but we're still restricting uses and we should let the market really dictate until we, things that don't create noise shouldn't be restricted, like R&D.
Well, R&D could involve noise.
There's other things, yeah, okay. So it's just an
We're
area
trying to
three
keep the
that's
more
restricted.
industrial uses kind of lower south and only neighborhood type commercial uses at the.
I'm trying to think of an R&D that causes noise.
Noise
Emissions.
Like we have all of that's coming to Squamish.
So I guess, I think the point Councilor Schwab's trying to make is like something like Seven Nash, they're doing R&D, but it's a quiet use, and so we don't want to restrict that necessarily, but if someone's testing out
Clean energy.
those things they use at soccer games, maybe allowed, like, so I'm not sure how we differentiate.
We could expand it right across. I mean, the intent of this zone is to be primary employment,
Yeah.
and residential is the secondary.
I'm thinking of clean tech. If we are moving towards that, are going to need some R&D facilities. And if we start restricting uses, we don't know what it's going to look like yet. Yeah.
You can go in area 1 and 2, not 3 at this point.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to make sure that we're open to market forces and not.
Karen, Doug, and then Chris.
How come Area 1 doesn't extend all the way across Pioneer Way?
Area 1 is the least intense area in terms of uses and density. And so it's basically the transition used to be south to north, and now it's more southwest to northeast in terms of heavier industry and lower density. Transition to more neighborhood commercial residential. So it simply allows for more opportunities for a greater amount of uses as well as more density.
Because the buffer's coming from the North Yards industrial area this way. The gradation.
Yes.
And so why are we enabling live-work units as a density bonus in Area 1 where we imagine that to be the sort of heavier industry?
So yes, live work units are not a density bonus, but if you want to put live work units on the second floor as part of that mix, then you have to do 30% of all of the units being rental.
So we're going to put residential everywhere on this site?
Yes, that's right. It's just the scale of residential is fairly low in Area 1, where you're probably going to get a story of accessory residential over top of the light industrial space, to Area 3 where you get multiple stories of residential.
So this is where I feel like, for myself, the balance isn't quite right. Because, just because there are retail uses in the business park now, doesn't mean that that's the kind of use we should be protecting. What we're trying to protect is employment and industrial space. And so to me, Area 1 would be the most industrial of all of those. And so aside from having like a caretaker suite in it, it really shouldn't have residential in it. That's well within our industrial park. The whole idea was to create a residential buffer at the north end, but leave the south end as much as possible so that industry can be unencumbered, that they can have deliveries all through the night, that they can have big trucks and have lay down areas and move around without having to compete with residential and retail traffic. That was my vision for this, that in the southern part of this development, we don't allow for that kind of use. So I'm a bit confused why residential has like bled all the way down to the south, because to me that wasn't what I originally envisioned for this buffer zone. Yes, at the north, as you go into the neighborhood, but really I want industrial and employment land that's not tainted by quasi-retail and people coming and going from their homes. That's my concern, is that no one will want to use that space for industrial use because they'll be concerned about getting complaints about noise and sound, because now we've got people living above what should actually just be manufacturing space.
Residential right now.
So the approach that, if I may just quickly, the approach we've taken is a hybrid between what's in the business park and what's north of it. And so the first reiteration of the bylaw also had residential live-work space in Area 1. It's likely that the developers will choose to just build industrial in that area because it works. But what we've also done is incentivize the commercial space by adding a little bit of residential. So your residential is tied to the industrial that you build in all three of those areas, Area 1 being the least residential, with some residential, and Area 3 being the most. So, but the objective was never to just eliminate residential in any one of these areas.
I'll just follow up with a quick comment. To me, some of these properties extend from Government Road down to Pioneer Way. And so there was opportunity for people to have residential and a mixed use at the northern side to create that buffer to neighborhood. And that we don't negatively impact industrial users to the south, because we've got pure industrial use on the southern portion of these properties, so that no one is in. So we've got industrial land right across Pioneer Way, and so if we have residential flowing all the way through those lands, we create potential conflicts, both for the rail yards on the west and for the industrial properties to the south. And so in my mind, Area 1 doesn't need to have residential. It should be purely light industrial. Area 2 is where I can see that we would maybe expand on that. And Area 3 is the place where you put the density around residential. This is starting to create more conflicts within the business park, not less.
Thanks. Doug, Chris, I'll put you on the list there.
Thanks. Thank you. Could you go back to the map? Well, first of all, a question. So Pioneer Way, and when you look, just so I'm clear about the diagram, when you look up the very left side of the site, that strip there that's outside the red area, that is the setback. Am I correct in saying that? That's somebody else's property?
That's the railroad property.
Railroad.
That's a road.
Oh, that's the present property that goes down to the station?
Yes, no, that's actually a fairly thin right-of-way, or I think it's 20-meter right-of-way where the railroad has a road in it.
It goes down to the station?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, but that's private property. So the access then coming off of Pioneer Way, when Mr. Rancher was talking about that, so he's talking about coming in the bottom of their property in the Area 1 area and going through Area 2 to service Area 3 possibly, because they can't come in the top. I see. Okay, now that I'm clear about that, but I tend to agree with Councillor Elliott, because this whole program, in my mind, was to go from something that is purely industrial and have a soft transition as opposed to a hard transition going industrial right up to Government Road, because we were also thinking about the existing community and residential area across the other side of Government Road. So if we put residential into Area 1, now we've introduced residential right in the middle of the business park. And what's the difference about doing it there versus doing it, on the lot right next door to Carney's, for example? Would we want to have it there? Probably not. So to me, the graduation makes sense. In Area 1, I don't see any reason for residential there. It should be, it potentially could be one of the noisier and more obtrusive light industrial areas next to the railroad, across the street from industry, away from Queensway. So I tend to agree with Councillor Elliott on that point. This is kind of 3 distinct areas going up in some form. And Area 1 is the bottom of some large lots where people can put the density. I think the other thing we're trying to do here is to be fair to the existing landowners with this zoning. And Area 1 is the area where those landowners have the ability to put value higher up and get a more economic return farther north in their properties.
Chris?
I think it's applaudable that we're trying to do a mixed-use neighborhood and really trying to define what mixed use is, and I think that's been the biggest challenge of what I hear. Industrial is a really hard thing to define nowadays. It's not as common, and I think it's growing to smaller scale industrial uses. I think the other obvious reference to look at is all the other port towns we could compare this to. We're reverse engineering it. Places like Portland, Seattle, Bellingham, up and down the Pacific coast. We're just doing it in reverse. And those areas are quite desirable places to live, to work, to walk, to commune in. So I think there's a huge need for this. I think the location of this is idealistic to have a transition from the North Yards down to the business park. I think the adjacency concerns Ted has about the rail are more of a sellability concern if circulation for traffic is dealt with on Pioneer, which would be the logical one for me. I think trying to get access to properties from government would be a challenge and a nightmare. So I think logically it would come from Pioneer. And obviously my preference, being an architect, would be an internal road system. We don't have laneways in Squamish except in a few areas downtown, but a site this big almost mandates that. And if we could start to be creative about what those laneways are, i.e. open space, vehicle delivery access, internal courtyards or commercial spaces that front Queens could also front internal open space, and all of a sudden we're taking community space to the interior of this lot, I think could be really powerful. So I think that is why it's important Area 2 doglegs around Queens, because the corner of blocks are natural entry points to any parcels, and if we can encourage commercial use facing Queens and also to the interior of the lot, all of a sudden you're activating the interior, quite a massive development. So I think it's crucial to wrap that. The other one, I think, to be cognizant of the challenge of Queensway being a floodway, that this whole site has to come up, I think it's 4 meters. So we're going to have quite a sectional height difference from the sidewalk on Queens to internal circulation. So I think that has to be dealt with internal in the property. So again, pedestrian and vehicle circulation coming through the inside off of Pioneer. So those hindrances, I think the only way we can make those work is if Area 2 does turn to that corner. And I think what we're going to find in Area 1 is we won't have much residential. I think it's going to be facilitated by what's attractive type of buildings to build. Maybe it's smaller industrial uses with one unit on the top, like a caretaker suite we would call it or something. I think what's really crucial to make this neighborhood successful is we allow it to be as flexible as possible so people like myself can do our job and create buildings that make sense on the site. If we start to overly prescribe where things can happen, we're going to end up with a really monotonous, not very feasible from a financial standpoint neighborhood. And I think all these things we're talking about that we want are not going to happen. So it's a big site. I think it's going to happen incrementally, and I think some of the flexible changes that have made in this round of the zoning provide me with so many more tools that we can design with, and that's going to go through the DP process, through ADP, probably through public, so many more avenues where you're going to actually see what can come out of this. If it's overly prescriptive, you're going to get a different type of building, i.e., 20-foot high tilt-ups. And And that's not what we want here. We need rental housing, employment lands, and a transition from residential to the north, to the industrial lands to the south. And I think this is doing a really great job at that, at least from, you know, me coming, I have to work within these parameters. So I hope this sticks. I think it's a really exciting opportunity. I think all the points brought have been great so far. So.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
I have Ted, Darren, Susan, and Karen, and we do need to wrap this up in the next 15 minutes.
Yeah, well, an internal road system to me is, you know, to Chris's point, I was leaving, so we can't. But an internal road system would, to me, really fix up this area. But to Karen's point, Doug's point, the Pioneer Way might be the railroad crossing someday. You know, I mean, it doesn't mean it's always going to go down Government Road, because it's going to be an easier shot for big trucks going out to the highway down Pioneer. And at one time, that was where all the trucks were supposed to go, down Pioneer. They're not supposed to go down Government Road through all the high density. So that someday might be the main road going down there. So the thought of Area 1 going all the way through the corner doesn't bother me. And you know, the thing that would make it work would be all the property owners getting together and coming back with a plan together, and then we could see something before we could approve this. We could go, that makes more sense. I don't mind on Area 1 seeing warehouses like we see in the business park right now. I mean, we got the big warehouses, they got high ceilings, and there's manufacturing going on, there's people making snowboards, and they're making windsurfers, and they're making beer and all that. I don't mind seeing that all the way down Pioneer Way. You know? So the big industrial stuff that we talk about, I have no issue with that going there, because we are running out of industrial space. It's not like we have lots of it left. You drive around down there and there's not much left. So an internal road, either coming in off Pioneer or Queens, going into that thing that Chris just talked about. He was all excited about designing something that's going to be really unique to that area. He was talking about the area. And so I think we have to look at it as that area, and we should have an opportunity to see kind of what that density is going to be. Because right now, if we agree this right now, we're agreeing basically to 5 stories over that whole area.
No, this has to go through the public process. We are
Okay.
not agreeing,
Okay.
this
All right,
will
well,
form the second reading.
Yeah, well, I would like to
but
see.
There's nothing decided.
I would like to see a couple of options for that internal road. You know, and I know most of the property owners here, it will add a lot of value, that internal road. It's gonna add a lot of value because it's gonna create, what Chris said, is a little community in there. There could be a kind of a park-like setting in the middle and parking, and there could be all sorts of cool stuff in there to make it
Yes.
attractive.
So we've tried to incentivize that single access by allowing buildings to go to 0 lot line to close off some of these access points. I think it's very important that we do keep it flexible, and that's what we try to do. And it sounds like an internal access road is also what the best use of and highest use of this land is. So our suggested approach is to keep it open.
Warehouses along Area 1 there, it's not, I'm totally not opposed to that. I mean, that's still a huge piece
Well,
of
that's
property.
what you could have.
You
Area
could
2
have.
doesn't prevent you from having light industrial kind of form that we have in the rest of the business park.
Darren, Susan, Karen, keep my eye on this talker.
I'm a fast talker, I'll make it quick here. Couple quick things. Office, the professional office major, I think even though it's included in all zones, everyone who has been giving feedback to planning has been trying to push that use back anyways as a second floor use. So I think in all likelihood, we would see it most likely in Area 3 in any intensity, just because everyone is probably going to be looking more at accessory office to industrial, that kind of thing, personal services. So I think, you know, I didn't want that use in Area 1 and 2, like personally, but the fact is because of the type of use that it's integrating with is probably most likely to show up in Area 3 in my opinion. Area 1 transition concerns, I think it's actually important to keep it the way it is, and the reason for that is when we go around the business park right now and we look at the typical light industrial warehouse, you've got like 30 to 35% site coverage on the high side for a functional site, right? And so what ends up happening on this site by having the bonus residential If I go onto any of the sites that you see built right now that tilt up concrete in the last 5 years, you maybe see 1 in 3 units has mezzanine being utilized, which is additional business square footage, right? And the thing nice about the way that this is structured now is it still has the 40% deliverable required. And so what's going to happen is instead of likely 30 some odd, early 30% coverage, you might still have that coverage of commercial. You might have a larger footprint getting up to 40 if parking is planned well. It forces it into smaller bays of probably more like 1,000 square feet because a 1,500 square foot user needs 5-ton truck parking, circulation, 40-foot trailer in some cases getting in. So by forcing that mezzanine build out on the second floor, you're kind of forcing it to being a smaller footprint user, which will not get built in the rest of the business park because there's no money in it, because you have to build too many bathrooms, walls, electrical panels. So you get this 1,000 square foot user with a 400 square foot upper. It could be separated office, it could be an accessory office, but I think you're actually getting a multiple of more than 1.4 of what you would get in a typical industrial build out. You definitely do get people looking for work-live spaces. They're never available. People are always asking for them. And I agree with Chris's comment, or Jonas, I don't remember which, that it's likely going to be a smaller unit that ends up on top of that transition zone at the front. And with that, you can certainly put a industrial noise covenant on the property, something like that, so people have full understanding of what they're getting into. But I think you'll actually see employment space delivered in Area 1 reduced by 30 to 50% anyways, if you don't have that ability to tighten up the format. And I can't say where, but there's 2 to 3 sites coming, I know right now, where people are looking at actual market deliverable of 1,500 square feet, maybe smaller, elsewhere in the business park, that will facilitate that kind of average space requirement that's not getting built right now because of construction costs. So I do think this is an opportunity here in Area 1 and 2 to get a smaller format user taken care of, which people like me turn down constantly, which is sorry I don't have it, sorry I don't have it. Don't even bother writing down their names, it's constant, right? And so I do think there's an opportunity there as well. Yeah. And very supportive of all the changes. I didn't say that before. Lots of amendments that make it flexible, and I agree with that because I think this is pioneering this new zone. Excuse the pun. But there's risk in this. Whoever's executing on it, there's some money to be made if it works out well, but there's some challenges and some money to go on the ground. It's not going to be a popular, first project for a bank. And so whoever steps up to push these things forward is going to have to put some capital at risk to get it across the finish line, right? So
None of those guys need banks.
I know.
I have Susan, Karen, Eric, and I do want to make sure any of the landowners who would like to say a few words, please let me know about. Before I do that, I'm just going to recess this meeting very temporarily, open up a special business meeting, look for a motion to approve the agenda, moved by Councilor Chappelle, seconded by Councilor Pryor. All those in favor, opposed, motion carries. And a motion to close, moved by Councilor Kent.
Just recess.
Recess.
Yeah, otherwise you have to throw everybody out.
Well, it's gonna,
You can't close right now.
okay. We're in recess on the special meeting. And we're back in the committee meeting. And we have Susan.
Thank you. That was an amazing transition. There's a lot that's been said, and having traveled to a lot of the port towns, and I was thinking about Portland, not Portland South here, but Portland, Maine, where I spend a lot of time, and in historically, people have always lived closer to their employment, and the work has always been at the port, and the noise of a working port with residences right next door, it's always been a more expensive, not a less expensive area to live. And I think this is the same, and I think that when I talk to business owners in the business park right now, they wish that their zoning had opened up so that they could densify the second floor, but currently with our zoning, you can't use the second floor space or the mezzanine because it doesn't allow for office use. So you have a very restricted amount of office use in the business park as it is, so those people that want that use can't have it because they're pop-up concrete buildings. And I don't want more pop-up concrete buildings with no density above. I would like to see the density, the employment down below with density above. And, it will be lower income partners. What we need is places for people to live and work. And I like the way that it's set out. I think it's very flexible and will bring innovation. And I think that, people that are looking outside in look at Squamish as a place to develop, and we've allowed that transition zone, having live work space above as well. You know, for us to imagine this now, it may be a stretch, but we have to look 50 years down the road. These buildings are gonna last forever.
So you're supporting what's,
Yeah, I
what's,
support,
what,
yes.
taking it to secondary?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Karen, Eric, Ted, and
Just a question about why, and this is maybe following up on Doug's earlier first comment about the amount of office space. With the changes that we're trying to do downtown, and really encourage that office space development, in my mind, it seems reasonable to protect some uses for certain areas and not everywhere, so that people can sort of make an investment decision based on what they know they can build down here, because they're not going to have to compete with it everywhere else in the district. And so I'm curious about why we chose the business and professional office major instead of minor. Because in my mind, leave the business and professional offices major to downtown, because downtown is going to need a lot of help. It's competing against a lot of new development, the oceanfront, Garibaldi Highlands, what's going to happen in everything in the industrial park is new. And it's going to need a little bit more time to develop.
So,
and so my question is, why wouldn't we put it to minor instead of major and put the major uses downtown?
That's a really good point. But I think what's important is the creation of space today for the future uses. So we could go with a minor today, and in the case where we have high density all around Squamish and particularly just north of here, we could expand that if we have a shortage of office space. But it is a good comment. What we tried to do was just make it feasible to a wide range wide array of businesses, because we know it's not going to be an easy thing to develop because of the mix of uses and some of the lending scenarios. But it is a good comment. Then maybe major in area 3 and minor in areas 1 and 2.
So I think we have to be careful. If we want to build out what we envision downtown, it's going to need a bit of space to be able to do that. So I'd like us to just think about that. The other one in terms of uses is in the drawing where you've got the 3 different buildings possible in each location, it's got neighborhood commercial.
Yes.
When you look at our neighborhood commercial, it includes a personal service establishment. But then in here you say it's limited to so in the drawing it's on the main level, but then in here it says it's limited to the second level.
Personal service establishments are a separate use, and it is called out as a use on the second level.
Yeah, but when you read our definition of neighborhood commercial, which is how you refer to it in the drawing, in the report.
Yep.
Yes.
It includes personal service establishments, professional offices. So those definitions just need to be, because I don't think personal service establishments should be on the main. I think they should be upstairs, because I don't think they create activated storefronts necessarily. So I just want to make sure we're aligned with how we're defining each of those uses. Because in one respect, you're saying it belongs in the second story, but then your drawing says neighborhood commercial and it's included in the use.
Yes, so neighborhood commercial is a wide category of use. And so it would, you're right, it would be permitted. It would permit some of those uses on the first floor in area 3. But then you go to second level then, and it constrains it down to specific uses. But that's a good point.
Because the bylaw states it's just second.
Eric?
Thank you, Mayor Heinzman. In the interest of your time this afternoon, I just have a general observation on your present discussion, but I also have some questions on another aspect of the bylaw concerning fuel storage, and you can direct me if there's another opportunity.
We're not speaking to that aspect today.
Uh-huh.
We were just talking about the HUD on the agenda today. There'll be public hearing on the other stuff, and certainly staff can answer questions.
I think I should probably deliver observations to staff before your public hearing, so I'll do that in a memo to Jonas. I have a number of questions.
On this
Very good.
HUD specification.
Then my general observation is I applaud your goal that you're all working towards in establishing buffer zones for industrial lands. And on behalf of clients, on behalf of the Forest Industry, I've been involved with this a number of years. But I'd like to point out that the Business Park Sub-Area Plan is now 5 years overdue, according to the provisions of the plan itself, for review. And in my opinion, there are several other more pressing interface issues now and emerging even in the business park alone, and even more that are much more important in terms of impacts to neighborhoods and businesses elsewhere in the community. So I just wanted to just offer that general observation. You're doing a lot of hard and careful work on an area, but you've got probably bigger interface concerns elsewhere. And that Business Park Sub-Area Plan is needing attention for a number of other reasons. I'll leave it at that.
We know that,
Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Mary. Ted and then Jason, and then we're going to try to wrap this up.
Yeah, what Eric was going to say is there's fuel storage across the street from this on Pioneer Way. So we're putting
Well,
residential.
don't put words in there.
Well,
Anyway.
it is fuel storage across the street, so we do have to remember that. So we're putting residential across the street for fuel storage. And anyway, my last point I'll make is, let's get the parking right on this one. Okay? Let's not have cars parked up and down both sides of the street, all the way around this development, having everyone going, what the heck is going on? Okay, so I heard you say you're going to share parking.
Very small part of it. We're suggesting that visitor parking could be shared
5
between
acres
commercial
around
and
there probably.
residential.
Let's just make sure everyone can park on it, if not. Thanks.
Jason?
Just a couple quick things. I was looking at this aerial map, and I think that probably, given the way that the railroad tracks are laid out, there's lots of shunting land. So I've seen, I don't know if that's what Ted meant, but seeing Pioneer actually be a crossing might be more in the long run, but could happen. But also, I think that what we should take into account is the fact that the BC rail lands, have been sitting very underutilized for the last, decade and a half. And I think we're going to have to come to a point where we think about some new vision for that area, and we may do that. And so I suspect that, given the way trends are heading, that what we'll be looking at is a revised plan that looks at lots of smaller players, instead of waiting for one big 500 job factory to come, or
Let's focus on.
right. And it's relevant to this discussion because that's why I'm comfortable with having residential in this area, because I don't think that we can expect to see an increase in heavy industrial in this particular area. So again, I think it's a very, it seems to me that it's something that's quite market driven, and I think that's important, and we'll see results much quicker than if we are looking at something that's not as in touch with market.
Mr. Whitaker, would you like to say anything? No, okay. So.
I'm a landowner.
Well, you got 30
I've got
seconds.
2 applications going. I just want to say, I think this.
Sit down.
Oh, sorry. I think this is an exciting zoning. It definitely could add some really interesting mixed use to the area. Some are opposed to being next to some other industrial. I think this, if it's successful, could carry on into the rail yards. One of my questions is the Area 1, for large, heavier users, isn't very big, especially if there's 2 separate property owners. So what you might end up using is, that could be open space, so it becomes a buffer as well, versus industrial, which is probably just as well, or parking. But anyway, it's very exciting. Hopefully we can get something going and we'll get another application going. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks. So, to be honest, there's been feedback all over the place.
Yes.
I'm hearing a couple different concerns from a couple different councillors. At this point, we're at first reading, and the idea was to come back with an amended second reading.
Yes.
And that's still, we're still within the parameters of the legislation that we can just amend first reading to make these changes without going too far outside of first reading? Okay. Generally speaking, I think at this point, to take it to second reading, I think what's in front of us is supportable. I think there's a few little things that maybe we may want to consider in terms of some of the uses and some of it, but I don't want to get too prescriptive either. I think we have to realize this is one node. We're not transferring this over to the entire industrial park. I don't see this migrating into the north yards. I think that's our last remaining heavy industrial, even if they may be smaller users or not 500 employees, there might be 200, 100. And we are working on a strategy, hopefully with BC Rail Properties, to finally give certainty and an opportunity for sustainable businesses there and business growth and employment growth there. So I think that will always be industrial. So I think at this point, besides, I think a little bit of feedback that you found some consensus on, maybe incorporate that into the bylaw. Bylaw will still come to council and we'll be able to obviously deliberate on second reading. And then depending on what happens at second reading, whether it gets adopted or amended or whatever, then that goes to public hearing and then consideration of third reading should council go there. So there's still lots to decide here, but I think generally speaking, I would be supportive of this coming back for second reading for council to deliberate on in a formal legislative process.
I would look forward to the revised map with the internal road and some.
Well, so the internal road, we can't prescribe an internal road on 6 different properties. That is up to the property owners to determine that.
But anyway, okay.
Yeah, come on up.
All right.
Thank you.
I would like to see the.
Hey, Mayor and Council, thanks for, my name's Paul Wood.
Hi, Paul.
We got to remember, I think there is consensus amongst the landowners to do this internal road system. We've been talking, and I think it's a great idea. Speaking to the higher or lower density in Area 1, I feel that your buffer zones are the roads. So Pioneer is a natural buffer zone. You've got Queensway, which is a natural buffer. So to put a heavier industrial portion in Area 1 will create, I think, adverse effect Area 2 and 3, where you've got these natural buffers, which are the roadways. And I agree, with the internal road system, and I think this will be market driven. So I support it, and I think it's a great idea.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm generally, with the exception of, I'm generally hearing support for the lines as they're now, with some exception of 2 or 3 councillors. That's what I've heard. General support, general support, general support, general support. You're concerned about some residential over here, you're concerned about residential down here. You seem to, and at this point, we're not, it comes back and we hear from the public and we understand more ramifications when we hear from the public, so Jonas, I'm just looking to you in terms of guidance. Do you have enough guidance to draft something? I mean, I think at this point we want to bring some. I didn't hear him.
Clear as mud.
I do have, I think, general understanding of what my work is now. I think there's a few things that we can do with proximity to Pioneer Way and the rail yards on the residential side that could address some of the concerns with impact, both from residential and to industrial. So I think a noise covenant and maybe some higher standards for noise attenuation on those exposed areas for residential could help with impacts. I've heard some discussion about office and having it being a major closer to Government Road versus a minor down to Pioneer, which I think is a good comment. And also research and development in Area 3, I think that was also, I didn't hear any opposition to that from council members.
Is there a way to define research and development?
in different contexts though? I separate out light industrial research development versus really quiet research and development. Darren, do you have any suggestions?
You'll find when you get like a more dense residential build, there'll be strata bylaws created for noise, so it'll be controlled through the strata. Like it's a bit of a conflict to get like zoning versus strata bylaws, but you can register it on title. It's really tough to remove. So a developer would probably be well advised to manage that if they felt any use could conflict in
And
the zoning.
they don't want to create something that makes every resident uncomfortable, and they don't want to create situations that make all the light industrial users uncomfortable. So it is an internal. Okay, I have Doug and then Karen, and then we really need to wrap up.
Yeah, and to help make Jonas's job easier, notwithstanding my comments, after listening to some of the other comments, I could consider this.
Karen?
I meant to ask a question earlier. Where would something like we've heard before that, you know, things like sound stages or film production kind of special effects. So places where they might need to make noise, does that fit in one of these
I
areas?
suspect they'll go on the rest of this, but not necessarily. We're not going to solve every.
No, I'm just wondering, you know, I mean, the area 2 is really big. So.
Light industrial is a permitted use in areas 1 and 2.
Okay.
Which is a fairly wide definition.
Okay. So
And the only change we've done here is we've disallowed medical marijuana production. Otherwise, it's allowed everywhere else in light industrial.
Right.
Okay, so no farming. All right, so you
can
have
sell
a
it.
good sense, and I do want to, this was a process that we had an idea of our goals in terms of long-term viability and sustainability of this corner, but we really did need the landowners and people with some expertise to help us formulate it, because it was a different way of sort of backcasting as opposed to forecasting a development. So I want to thank everyone for participating. I think the little changes, I think, were really, really helpful to make this beneficial for the landowners, and hopefully, you know, we'll see how it goes through the process. I'm going to cut it off soon. So, what?
I'm just interested in that comment because indoor food production, I don't understand how, if we're gonna, I'm just thinking about the future, we have food policy coming forward, and we don't allow food, like if we're doing internal growing, that isn't a noisy.
It's just marijuana production.
Just
It's
marijuana
not,
production.
you can do
One planet on
aquaponics, you
another
can
planet.
do.
Yes.
Yeah.
It does smell.
You can do other types of farming.
No, I just wanna make sure that the
Okay.
regular farming is fine.
So,
Yes.
you're good?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. I will
Thank you.
move that we terminate. Is there a second or second by Councilor Blackman? Unless we have something else, no status, we're good. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much.